The crystal chandeliers of the Four Seasons in Los Angeles gleamed like they were trying to impress somebody's stock portfolio. Every table in the ballroom looked expensive on purpose. White tablecloths, gold-rimmed glasses, servers gliding by with trays of tiny food that cost more than most people's rent. A jazz band played in the corner, soft enough not to interrupt funding pitches, loud enough to make rich people sway their shoulders and feel charitable. At the center of it all stood Irwin Parker. His navy suit fit so well it almost felt unfair. The knot of his lavender tie sat perfectly at his collar, and his cufflinks reflected the light each time he shook another hand. Cameras flashed around him as donors, board members, and tech investors rotated in and out of his orbit. "Just one more," a photographer called. Irwin turned slightly, head angled just right, that polished billionaire grin sliding into place. He'd done this 1,000 times, talk about numbers, mention community impact, pose next to a huge check, clap someone on the back like they were old friends. To anyone watching, he was exactly what they expected, calm, confident, completely in control. 7 months ago, he had walked away from the only woman who'd ever made all of this feel small. 7 months ago, he had shut a door on Ruby Matthews with a weak excuse and too much pride. And since then, no amount of success had silenced the quiet question that waited for him at night. What if you just threw away the best part of your life? Another camera flash went off. Irwin's smile held steady. "Mr. Parker, could you just tilt your chin a little?" "Perfect," the photographer said. Irwin tilted his chin. His eyes slid over the crowd out of habit, checking the exits, the donor tables, the silent auction items lined up near the back wall. That was when his world stopped. Halfway through a smile, Irwin's face froze. The corners of his mouth drooped a fraction, but the photographer didn't notice yet. His gaze had hooked onto one spot across the room like someone had, grabbed his attention with invisible hands and refused to let go. At the far side of the ballroom, near the buffet, a server moved between tables with a silver tray balanced on one palm. White shirt, black vest, dark slacks, simple, neat uniform. But it was the face that hit him. Ruby. For a second, the rest of the ballroom went quiet in his mind. The clinking glassware, the scattered conversations, the band in the corner, it all blurred into a dull hum. He just saw her. Ruby's hair was pulled back, curls escaping around her face, catching the light each time she turned. Her expression was focused, professional, jaw set with that steady determination he knew too well. She was offering appetizers to a table full of smiling guests, nodding politely, keeping her posture straight. But the tray she held wasn't the first thing he noticed. It was her stomach. The fabric of her shirt stretched gently over a round belly that had not been there the last time he saw her. Not even a little. Not at all. His fingers tightened around his glass. The ice inside clinked against the sides with a noisy rattle. "Mr. Parker?" the photographer said. "Still with us?" Irwin didn't answer. His hand tilted just slightly, liquid shifting dangerously close to the rim. A drop slid over and landed cold against his knuckles. He didn't even flinch. His eyes stayed locked on her. Ruby moved to the next table, her tray still steady, not a single glass out of place. One of the guests said something that made the circle laugh. Ruby smiled, polite, careful, nothing like the carefree grin she used to throw at him when she caught him reaching for a second helping of her cooking. She adjusted the tray, and the movement made the curve of her belly even more obvious. Irwin's chest tightened. Pregnant. For a second his brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. The timeline, the distance, the silence, all of it rushed together in one dizzy wave. Ruby. Here. Ruby. Working this event. Ruby. Pregnant. The glass in his hand gave another little warning tilt, ice tapping against crystal. "Sir," a passing server murmured nervously, reaching out to steady the drink before it slipped. Irwin blinked, jerking slightly back into the present. "I've got it," he said, more sharply than he meant to. The server backed away with a quick nod. He swallowed, throat dry. 7 months ago, he had left Ruby in the middle of a storm, mumbled something about being unhappy, and drove away like he hadn't just smashed a future they were both building. Now, under the glow of ballroom lights and donation banners, he was staring at the evidence that his actions hadn't just broken a heart, they had created something he didn't even know existed. 7 months after he left her, this was the moment billionaire Irwin Parker learned that choices don't just end. Sometimes they come back with tiny kicking feet. Ruby lifted her eyes as she angled toward the dessert table, and their gazes finally met. For a flicker of time, the tray in her hand might as well have vanished. Her steps faltered. Her lips parted like she'd just walked into cold water. Her dark eyes widened, recognition shooting across the space between them like a current. Erwin forgot to breathe. She's here. She sees me. She's pregnant. His heart plummeted through his ribcage and landed somewhere near his polished shoes. All the speeches he'd rehearsed alone in his head for months, the apologies, the explanations, the "I was wrong," they evaporated the second he saw her belly. 7 months. His mind whispered the number before he consciously thought it. 7 months since he walked out of her apartment. 7 months since the last time he heard her voice in person. 7 months since he drove away and convinced himself he'd done the right thing. 7 months since he left. 7 months pregnant. The math did not ask for permission. It moved in, fast and merciless. His fingers clenched the glass so hard his knuckles went pale. The room tilted for just a moment, then snapped back into place. Ruby's tray wobbled before she steadied it. If her hands shook at all, she hid it well. They held each other's gaze for a heartbeat that felt too long and too short at the same time. Have you ever walked away from someone thinking you'd be fine, only for life to bring them back in front of you holding proof that you weren't just wrong, you were careless? Or maybe you've been Ruby. You loved someone, you trusted them, and just when you thought you were finally healing, they reappeared on a night you didn't ask for, in a room you didn't choose, while you're carrying the very thing they walked away from. You swallow your feelings, fix your posture, and remind yourself you're not here for him. You're here for survival, for your child, for your own peace. Some of you know exactly how that feels. You've regretted ending something too quickly. You felt abandoned at the exact moment you needed someone to stand beside you. You've stood in front of a person who broke you and decided, no, I'm choosing my dignity over begging you to stay. If any of that sounds close to home, you're in the right place tonight. Welcome back to Stories by Mr. Flex, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. Now, back to Ruby and Erwin. Erwin forced his feet to move. It felt like pushing through wet cement, but he did it anyway. Leaving had been easy. Crossing this room suddenly felt like climbing a mountain with no air. He murmured an apology to the cluster of donors he stepped away from and started threading through the tables. Every step brought him closer to the woman he'd been trying not to search for in every crowd. His familiar investor greeting voice had nothing to offer him now. All he had were memories of Ruby's laugh, the way she sang under her breath while cooking, the way her fingertips always smelled faintly of garlic and sugar after a long day in the kitchen. He had traded all that for a quiet penthouse and a calendar full of meetings. As he neared the buffet area, he could hear the usual event chatter. Isn't that the education program he funded? I heard he's expanding overseas. I wonder who catered this shrimp. But some of the murmurs cut a little closer. Is that the woman he used to date? A guest whispered nearby, tone curious but not kind. I heard he left someone in a bad way, another said quietly. You know how people in his position are. Ruby's shoulders stayed squared. Her face relaxed into a professional smile as she offered canapes to a table. If she heard anything, she didn't show it. She simply continued her job, careful and steady, one tray at a time. Meanwhile, in Erwin's chest, panic beat against his ribs like it was trying to get out. What did you do? He watched her hands, those hands that once held his face, stirred sauces, played around his neck when she thought he was asleep. Now they held a tray in a room full of people who didn't know the full story. Ruby turned. It was a small movement. She pivoted to bring the tray toward another cluster of guests. But the angle revealed the full curve of her belly clearly for the first time. Erwin's breath caught. There was no guessing anymore, no rumor, no vague half-truth from someone who heard something from somebody else. She was expecting. His drink shook in his hand so violently this time that ice rattled against glass like a tiny alarm bell. A drop sloshed over the rim and landed on his tie. He didn't even look down. He reached her corner of the floor, just as she lowered the tray onto a side table to refill it. Ruby, he said softly. Her name came out smaller than he meant, like his voice had to squeeze past months of regret before it could reach the air. She stiffened. Her hands paused over the tray. Slowly, she lifted her head. Hi, Erwin, she replied. Her voice was steady, but there was a quiet tremble around the edges that only someone who knew her well would catch. He heard it. It squeezed his chest tighter. Up close, the changes were even more obvious. Her face looked a little fuller, a little softer. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes that told stories about late nights. Not enough sleep, and more worry than she would ever admit out loud. But her gaze was clear, direct. He'd always loved that about her. Ruby never had a problem looking him straight in the eye. "Can we talk?" he asked, glancing toward a quieter corner near the catering prep area. She followed his look, then scanned the room. Other servers moved around them, working. Guests laughed and clinked glasses. This was not the place to dissect 7 months of silence. Still, she nodded once. "I have a minute," she said. They stepped a little away from the main flow of foot traffic, just far enough that the noise blurred into the background. The moment they stopped, his eyes dropped to her stomach again. He couldn't help it. "Ruby, you're—" He swallowed again. Words, usually his easiest tool, suddenly refused to cooperate. "You're pregnant." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Perceptive, as always," she said, with a tiny half-smile that had more steel than warmth. He winced. He deserved that. "How far along are you?" The question tumbled out too fast, too hungry. For a fraction of a second, something flashed across her face. Pain, maybe. Or disappointment. Or exhaustion from repeating facts she knew would hurt him. She held his gaze. 7 months, Ruby said. 2 words. That was all it took. 7 months. 7 months since the rain hit her windows while he packed excuses into a few sentences and called it a conversation. 7 months since he chose pride over honesty. 7 months since he walked out of her door, telling himself he was doing what was best, without even asking what she wanted. 7 months pregnant. His mind didn't need a calculator for that one. The numbers lined up directly with his absence. The truth didn't just tap him on the shoulder. It slammed into his chest so hard he almost took a step back. "This is your child." His fingers loosened around his glass. For a heartbeat, he thought it might slip from his hand entirely. He tightened his grip just in time, pulse racing, palms damp. Career? He had controlled that. Company growth? Controlled. Stock price? He spent his life trying to keep that under control too. But this? The life growing inside Ruby, the life that started before he ended things, the life he hadn't known about. This was one thing his money couldn't manage, his board couldn't vote on, his assistant couldn't schedule. For the first time in a long time, pure fear climbed up his spine. Tonight, the unseen narrator in his story whispered to you, and to him at the same time. Erwin doesn't just meet his unborn child. He meets the version of himself he never wanted to face. Ruby shifted her weight, one hand resting lightly over her belly. She wasn't the woman he left behind, fragile from the breakup, sobbing in a doorway. She was standing upright in a crowded ballroom, carrying a child, working a job, building a future. She had something more important than his apology now. She had her own strength. She had her baby. She had a life in motion. Will she let him back into that life, and into their child's? Can a man who has always led with pride learn humility before it's too late? Can forgiveness sit beside firm boundaries and self-respect and still make room for love? Those are the questions Erwin is about to live through. If you've ever believed in second chances, or if you want to see how badly one man can mess up and still fight for his family, make sure you like this video, drop a comment with second chances, and subscribe so you don't miss how this story ends. Because before this ballroom, before the baby bump and the shattered pride, there was a Juneteenth festival, a jar of chili-infused barbecue sauce, and a woman named Ruby who could make a billionaire forget about money for one afternoon. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to the beginning, to understand why one look across a crowded ballroom nearly knocked the air out of Erwin's lungs. You have to go back to a hot June afternoon in downtown Los Angeles. Music bounced off brick buildings as the Juneteenth festival filled the street. Kids chased each other through lines of folding chairs. The smell of grilled meat, roasted corn, and baked beans drifted in every direction. A gospel group warmed up near the church steps, humming and clapping as people set up booths. Ruby Matthews wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist and tugged a bright yellow tablecloth straight across a folding table. The color popped against the gray sidewalk and the faded basketball court paint behind her. "All right, y'all, this table is not about to look crooked on the Lord's internet," she muttered, smoothing out one last wrinkle. On the table sat rows of glass jars with simple labels. Behind that, a smaller basket of homemade pickles waited for people who thought they were brave. Ruby stepped back, hands on her hips, admiring her setup. A local elder from the church walked past and nodded in approval. Someone across the way yelled, "Ruby, you better sell out today." "I plan to," she called back, lifting a jar like a trophy. This booth wasn't just about sauce. Every jar was raising money for her adult education and tutoring program. Every dollar meant more laptops, more textbooks, more chances for adults and kids in the neighborhood to catch up on skills people took for granted. She tucked a side curl back into the band, holding her hair. The sun sat high and bright, but she thrived in it. This was her world. Church folks, kids from her classes, neighbors, who knew her grandmother, choir members waving from the food line. Ruby leaned over the table to rearrange a stack of flyers about her program. Each one printed with contact info and a photo of smiling students. That's when the trouble walked up in a linen suit. Erwin Parker stepped into the festival like he'd taken a wrong turn out of a different universe. His white linen jacket looked more used to rooftop lounges than neighborhood block parties. Sunglasses perched on his nose, and his shoes had that shine rich people always said was casual but never actually was. He'd flown down for a tech conference and a series of investor meetings. A board assistant had suggested he connect with the community while he was in town. Maybe grab a few photo ops, maybe post something about supporting local education. Erwin pretended this was a strategic decision. Truth was, he needed a break from hotel conference rooms and people saying synergy like it was an actual meal. He followed the scent of smoke and seasoning toward the food vendors, loosening his collar just a bit. The sound of a drum circle pulled his attention down the street, but something else caught his nose first. Spice, sweetness, heat. He turned toward Ruby's table just as someone handed him a small paper cup. "Free sample," a teenager said, holding up a tray. "Barbecue beans. Try not to cry." Erwin smirked. "I've survived quarterly earnings calls. I can handle beans." He scooped a bite with the flimsy plastic spoon, popped it into his mouth, and felt his whole face rethink its life choices. There was smoke. There was sweetness. There was a kick that walked up slow and then slapped him kindly across the tongue. He coughed once, eyes widening. "Yeah," the teenager said, nodding. "That's the reaction." A laugh floated from behind the table. "It's not that hot," Ruby said, lifting her brows. "He'll be fine. I have water if he starts speaking in tongues." Erwin turned toward her, snatching the tiny napkin the teen offered. For a heartbeat, he forgot about his name, his company, the conference badge still clipped to his pocket. Ruby's eyes were deep brown, framed by lashes that curled without help. Her skin glowed in the sunlight, not because of any high-end product, but because she'd been running around setting up tables, lifting boxes, laughing with people. A few curls had escaped and brushed her cheek whenever she moved. She wore a festival t-shirt tied at the waist, jeans and an apron with a smudge of sauce near the pocket. The look on her face was half "I dare you" and half "I'm too busy saving the world to babysit your taste buds." Erwin swallowed, the spice settling. "This is incredible," he managed. "What did you put in that?" Ruby tilted her head. "Effort, a little garlic, childhood memories. Why?" He opened his mouth to answer, but made the classic mistake of rich people in busy spaces. He talked with his hands. One careless wave, and his arm clipped the stack of flyers perched at the edge of her table. The entire pile went flying. Paper fluttered in every direction. A few landed on someone's plate. One folded itself neatly into an open cooler. Another stuck to a passing stroller like a hitchhiking announcement. "Watch it, big man," Ruby exclaimed, lunging forward. She dropped to a crouch, trying to catch the escapees before they reached a tub of potato salad. Erwin jerked back, mortified. "Oh no, I'm so sorry." He hurried to help, chasing a flyer that drifted toward a trash can. A gust of wind decided to join the comedy, lifting a sheet higher right as he reached for it. He grabbed too late and nearly bumped into a woman carrying a tray of cupcakes. She jerked sideways with a sharp gasp. "Sir," she snapped. "I am so sorry," he blurted again, ducking out of her way with his hands up. He turned back to Ruby. "I can't juggle beans and paper at the same time, apparently." Ruby scooped up 2 flyers from under a folding chair and straightened, her lips twitching like she was trying not to laugh. "This is a peaceful event," she said, pointing at him with a stack of reclaimed paper. "No flyer warfare allowed." He exhaled a short, embarrassed laugh. "I'll donate to the flyer replacement fund." She gave him a long, amused look. How about you donate by listening instead? You must be Erwin Parker, right? He blinked. Yes. How did you know? She shrugged. You've got a whole tech lab named after you at the community college down the road. Folks talk. Plus, billionaires don't usually show up around here in linen jackets unless somebody sent them an invitation. Erwin glanced down at his outfit like it had betrayed him. Was it the jacket or the confused expression? Combination, she said. I'm Ruby. I run the adult education program that lab supports. She stuck out her hand, sauce-smudged apron and all. He took it. Her handshake was firm, warm, confident. I've heard about you, he said honestly. Your reports come across my desk. You're the one who doubled the enrollment in under a year. Ruby shrugged one shoulder like that wasn't a big deal. People just needed someone to pick up the phone and say, hey, you can still go back to school even if life took a detour. That's all. That's not all, he replied. That's work, real work. Something flickered in her eyes at that. A tiny spark of appreciation, mixed with a little suspicion. Like she'd heard nice words before, and was collecting evidence to see if he meant it. All right, Mr. Parker, she said, folding the last flyer back into the stack. Since you almost donated my entire print budget to the wind, you owe me. I do, he agreed readily. What exactly is the debt? She tapped a jar on the table. One jar of famous Ruby's chili-infused barbecue sauce is $20. But since you came in here causing a paper hurricane, your price is $50. I'll throw in pickles. He let out a surprised little laugh. $50? You're a tech billionaire, she said with a smirk. You'll survive. Plus all the money goes back into my program. Consider it a very tasty line item in your impact report. He looked at the handwritten label, then at her. You drive a hard bargain, Ruby. That's because my students deserve laptops that were made this decade, she replied. He reached for his wallet without another word, peeled out a crisp bill, and set it in the donation jar. She nodded once, satisfied, then picked up one jar and a smaller container from the basket. Here you go, sauce and pickles, be careful. The pickles have opinions. He accepted them like they were more fragile than his last merger. Do I need instructions or do I just survive? You put the sauce on food and try not to embarrass your ancestors, she said. That's the instruction. He laughed properly that time. It shook off some of the stiffness he'd carried in with him. What's the secret ingredient? The love, Ruby answered smoothly, and a whole lot of garlic. A group of kids passed by, calling her name. She waved at them, promised she'd stop by the game booth later. One of the little ones came to hug her waist, eyeing Erwin's linen jacket with open curiosity. Do you work at the bank? The child asked him. No, Erwin said, surprised. Why? You look like interest rates, the kid said solemnly, then ran off. Ruby bent over laughing, bracing one hand on the table. Out of the mouths of babes, she gasped. Erwin pressed his lips together, fighting his own laughter. Does he roast everyone like that? Only the people he likes, Ruby replied. Congratulations, you got promoted to Sir Interest Rate. He made a show of bowing. An honor, truly. She smiled, softer this time. So what brings you here, besides testing your tolerance for chili and truth-telling children? He glanced around. Honestly, I needed a break. My team keeps talking about community outreach and I realized I hadn't actually been in a community space like this in a long time. Figured I'd come see the people behind the reports. Welcome to the real data, she said, gesturing at the festival. We got chicken, kids running with sticky hands, and aunties who will grill you harder than any shareholder. That actually sounds scarier than my board, he admitted. Good, she said. Keeps you honest. A brief, comfortable silence settled between them. Ruby straightened another jar, then tilted her head at him. So, she said casually, you just walk around tasting everybody's food, knocking over what they're using to feed the neighborhood. That your thing? He smiled. Normally I'm a lot more graceful when I ruin things. She gave him a look that said she heard more in that sentence than he'd meant to reveal. What do you really do, Erwin? She asked. Outside of conferences and checks and labs with your name on them. He hesitated, unused to that question from people who weren't networking. I build things, he said slowly. Robotics, software, systems. We started in a garage. Now we've got offices in 3 cities. People think that's the impressive part. You don't? She asked. In some ways, sure, he said. But sometimes it feels like I built a giant machine that runs on my life. Days blur together. Launch, meeting, report, repeat. He glanced at her table. I forget that there are actual people behind the numbers. Kids in your program. Adults trying again. Ruby studied him. You sound tired. He let out a breath. Some days, yeah. She leaned on the table with her arms folded. You ever tutor anyone yourself? I'm not sure I'd be good at it, he replied. I get impatient. Try tutoring a grown man in fractions who's working 2 jobs, she said. You'll learn patience real quick. I wouldn't know where to start, he confessed. Start with listening, Ruby said simply. Ask what they're afraid of. Math, life, failing again. Then remind them that one test doesn't get to be the whole story. He looked at her for a long second. You do that for hundreds of people? He asked. I do it for whoever walks through the door, she said. Sometimes that's 10 people. Sometimes it's 3. Every story counts. There was something in her tone that stuck with him, like a lyric he didn't want to forget. A burst of laughter erupted from the stage as a local musician made a joke. The band started playing a familiar church tune remixed with a drumline. People began forming a small dance circle near the center of the court. One of the volunteers called out to Ruby. You getting in this? I'll be there in a second, she shouted back, then turned to Irwin. All right, Sir Interest Rate. You gonna stand around holding your sauce like a trophy, or are you going to see how your money actually moves people? He glanced toward the dance circle, then back at her. You want me to dance? That would be memorable, she said. But we'll start with watching. Baby steps. He weighed his options. Return to his hotel and a bland conference dinner later? Or stay here, holding a jar of barbecue sauce and listening to a woman who made more impact with a folding table than most committees did with full budgets? He stayed. They moved closer to the music, standing side by side while a group of kids tried to copy a line dance one of the elders was teaching. Ruby clapped along, her shoulders moving slightly with the beat. Irwin's attempts at clapping in rhythm earned him a quick side eye and a grin. You're on like a 3 count, she teased. But it's cute. I can afford rhythm lessons, he said dryly. I'll give you a discount, she shot back. They watched as a little girl hopped into the center, dancing with complete confidence. A cheer went up around her. Ruby's face softened. That right there, she said under her breath, is why I do what I do. Kids who still think they can do anything. You didn't have that? He asked quietly. She paused. Not always. I had love. I had prayers. But resources? She shook her head. I had to fight for every opportunity. That's why I'm stubborn now. I want the next generation to know somebody fought for them on purpose. He nodded slowly. I just signed checks, he said. It doesn't feel like enough. It's a start, she replied. But if you really want to help, don't just drop in and disappear. Build something that lasts longer than a headline. He held her gaze. Is this feedback? This is a free consultation, she said, turning back to the dancers. Normally I charge extra. Behind them, her stack of flyers, rescued from the earlier chaos, sat neatly on the table. One of the festival organizers approached, grabbed a few to pass out, and gave Ruby a thankful nod. As the afternoon went on, people flowed in and out of conversations with her. Ruby introduced Irwin to one of her students, to a parent from the program, to a retired teacher who volunteered on weekends. No one bowed to him or asked for a selfie. They shook his hand, thanked him for the lab, and went back to their lives. It humbled him in a way he couldn't quite name. At some point, Ruby grabbed her ukulele from behind the booth. The instrument looked worn, but the strings were bright and clean. She tuned it with practiced fingers. You don't strike me as shy, he said. Not when it comes to music, she answered. I grew up in church. We sing through everything. Joy, grief, bad weather, late rent, car trouble. There's a hymn for all of it. She strummed a few chords and started humming. Some of the kids gathered near, expecting a song they knew. What are you playing? Irwin asked. Just something simple, she said. You want to learn a chorus? He held up his hands defensively. Oh, I don't sing. The last time I tried, someone asked if a smoke alarm was going off. She laughed. Good. Then you've already hit rock bottom. There's nowhere to go but up. She showed him a basic rhythm, slow enough for his clumsy fingers. He tried, missed the beat, tried again. Ruby corrected him gently, guiding his hand. There, she said. That's close. He listened to the kids sing along with her, feeling strangely at peace. For once, nobody was asking him for a decision about a merger or grilling him about profit margins. He was just a man standing next to a woman who cared deeply about her people, holding a borrowed ukulele and a jar of sauce. Hours slipped by. The sun lowered, turning the sky orange. The crowd didn't thin much. It just shifted from daytime families to evening hangouts. Eventually, Ruby checked her watch. "You still here?" she said teasingly. "I figured you'd be back in an air-conditioned boardroom by now." "I like it here," he admitted. "It's loud, but it's real." She wiped down her table, counted the remaining jars, and smiled. "Looks like you might get the last one. Everyone else cleaned me out." "Good," he said. "More for me." She reached under the table, grabbed a tired-looking notebook, and flipped it open. "I keep a list of folks who want to know about new classes and volunteer opportunities. If you're serious about helping, write your number down." He took the pen. "You mean my assistant's number?" Ruby raised a brow. "No, yours. I don't need to talk to your calendar. I need to talk to you." He hesitated, then wrote his phone number, feeling oddly exposed. She glanced at it, then nodded. "I'll text you some updates. You can ignore them, and I'll know you're just here for the sauce." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his own phone, and opened a new contact screen. "Your turn," he said. She smiled, reciting her number. He typed carefully, making sure he didn't misplace a single digit. "And your last name?" he asked. "Matthews," she said. "Ruby Matthews." He saved it. For a beat, neither of them moved. The festival swelled around them. Music, laughter, voices, kids yelling for one more snow cone before they went home. Erwin cleared his throat. "Thank you for letting me ruin your flyers and your quiet afternoon." "You didn't ruin it," Ruby said. "You just added a story." She tapped the jar in his hand. "Now go taste that properly and call me after you survive it." He grinned. "Is that permission?" "That's a challenge," she corrected, her eyes dancing. "We'll see if your taste buds are as strong as your net worth." He walked away finally, the sauce tucked under his arm, phone buzzing faintly, in his pocket with notifications from the world he was returning to. Later that night, in a hotel room with a view of the city lights, he stood over the tiny kitchenette counter, opened the jar, and tried the sauce straight with a piece of bread. It lit his tongue up all over again. He laughed to himself, alone in a room too big for one person, and reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over her name, Ruby Matthews. Down in Inglewood, Ruby sat on her bed, flipping through her notebook, counting how much they'd raised, working out what that meant for new supplies. Her phone buzzed. A message popped up. "Unknown number, this sauce almost knocked me out. I'd like to discuss a long-term supply deal, and maybe tutoring for my rhythm." She smirked and shook her head. "Ruby, survive 3 jars, show up for 1 class, and we'll talk." Neither of them knew it yet, but that simple exchange, that sunny afternoon, that jar of sauce on a borrowed table, that was where everything started. Long before the ballroom, long before the hurt, long before 7 months of silence. It started right here, with a woman who fought for her community and a man who didn't yet understand what it meant to fight for someone other than himself. The Juneteenth festival was winding down by the time Ruby closed the last lid on her cooler. The sun had dropped low enough to paint everything in warm gold, and the music shifted to slower, familiar tunes that felt like the end of a good day. Ruby wiped down her folding table, humming under her breath, motion smooth and steady. A few kids she tutored came up to hug her before leaving. One gave her a sticky high five. Another handed her a half-eaten snow cone to hold real quick, which she promptly refused with both hands raised. Erwin watched from a respectful distance, leaning against a lamppost with his hands in his pockets. He hadn't planned on waiting around. He'd told himself he would head back to his hotel after trying the sauce and exchanging a polite message or two. But watching Ruby work, laughing, encouraging, cleaning, making people feel seen, something kept him rooted to the concrete. When the last visitor walked away, Ruby packed up her jars and flyers into a rolling crate. Erwin stepped forward, clearing his throat lightly so he wouldn't startle her. "You survived," Ruby said, noticing him. "I did," he replied. "Barely. That sauce needs a warning label. Don't be dramatic," she said with a smirk. "It builds character." Erwin chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Can I help you carry any of this to your car?" Ruby raised a brow. "In a linen suit? You sure you want to risk it?" He looked down at his sleeves. Sauce stains were already a possibility given the day he'd had. "I'll take my chances." Ruby shrugged, handing him a folded table. "Fine. But if you drop it, I'm calling the kid from earlier to roast you again. That feels unnecessary, Irwin joked, adjusting his grip. Together, they walked the short path toward the parking lot. It wasn't fancy, just concrete, chain-link fencing, and a mural of historical black leaders painted by local teens. Ruby's footsteps tapped lightly. Irwin's were heavier, slower. You really stayed the whole time? She asked casually. Guess so. Why? Irwin thought for a moment. I like the way people act around you, he said honestly. It's grounding. Grounding, Ruby repeated with a half laugh. That's the word you're going with? He shrugged. I don't get many spaces where people talk to me like I'm a regular man. Ruby gave him a side glance. You are a regular man. You just have an abnormal wallet. He cracked a small smile. Fair. They reached her car, a reliable older SUV with a church bumper sticker and a small dent in the back. Ruby popped the trunk and gestured for him to place the table inside. You volunteer often? He asked. Every week, she replied. Between the kids I tutor and the adults who come back for GED prep, I stay pretty busy. That's impressive. Ruby looked at him with one brow raised. Irwin, everything impresses you. I think you just like collecting stories. Maybe, he admitted, but I like yours the most so far. Ruby paused, her fingers still holding the trunk door. A faint blush warmed her cheeks before she forced herself to look back into the car. Don't start with lines. That wasn't a line, he said steadily. She didn't argue, but she also didn't let him off the hook easily. We'll see. They closed the trunk and walked a few steps toward the sidewalk. So, what's next? Irwin asked. Do you go home and rest? Ruby snorted. Rest? After a festival? No, sir. I'm going to meet some friends for dinner. We always do a Juneteenth wrap-up meal. You know. Decompress, laugh, figure out who fell asleep during choir practice last Sunday. Irwin nodded. Sounds fun. It is. Another beat passed. The evening breeze lifted one stray curl from Ruby's forehead, and she brushed it back with quick fingers. Irwin shifted his weight, his confidence slipping into something softer. Would it be too forward to ask if I could join? Ruby stopped walking. He regretted the question for half a second. Then she tilted her head and studied him, her expression curious but unreadable. You sure about that? She asked. This isn't one of your investor dinners. My friends are loud. They talk with their hands, and they will absolutely ask why you're here. I can handle loud, he said, and I won't mind explaining. Ruby narrowed her eyes, as if testing the strength behind his words. All right, she finally said, but you're paying for your own food. I'm not covering Billionaire meals with my non-profit salary. Irwin laughed. Deal. Ruby checked her phone. Meet me at Mama Lupe's on Crenshaw. You can follow me if you want. He nodded eagerly, too eagerly in fact, because Ruby laughed under her breath and shook her head. Relax. You act like you're meeting the president. I'm meeting you, he said, and that simple answer. It made Ruby fall silent for a moment. They got into their cars. Irwin adjusted his tie in the mirror, realizing how out of place he would look in a neighborhood restaurant. He briefly considered taking off the jacket, but decided that trying too hard might look worse. The drive was short. The streets shifted from festival noise to sunset calm. When they reached the restaurant, Ruby was already at the door, waving him over with a little smile that made him forget his nervousness. Inside, Mama Lupe's was small, warm, and full of life. Tables crowded with families. Aroma of fresh tortillas and seasoned chicken in the air. Ruby's friends sat in a booth, already loud laughing. One of them spotted Irwin behind Ruby and raised both eyebrows so high they nearly left her forehead. Ruby slid into the booth next to a friend. Irwin took a seat across from them, feeling the weight of being evaluated but choosing to stay steady. So, who's the corporate snack? One friend asked bluntly. Ruby nearly choked on her water. Girl, please, don't do that, she said, swatting her friend's arm. Irwin lifted both hands. I have no idea what that means, but I'm hoping it's not an insult. The friend grinned. Depends on if you leave a tip. Ruby covered her eyes. Ignore her. She has no filter. Their waitress came by, dropping off chips and salsa. Irwin reached for a chip, dipped it into the salsa, and, again, severely underestimated Ruby's community seasoning. He coughed unexpectedly. Ruby elbowed him. Careful. They don't play with spice here. He nodded. trying to keep his dignity intact as her friends laughed. As dinner went on, the conversation flowed easier. Ruby's friends teased her, teased him, and somehow they all seemed to accept him a little without even trying. Between bites of enchiladas, Ruby leaned back, watching Erwin struggle adorably with a hot sauce he shouldn't have touched. "You doing okay over there?" she teased. "I'm fine," he croaked. "You look like your forehead is negotiating with your brain," she replied. He wiped his brow dramatically. "I think my tongue is reconsidering its job." Ruby's laugh filled the booth, warm and bright, and something in Erwin, something tightly coiled, unwound a little more. When they finally stepped out into the night air, Ruby stretched her arms above her head and sighed. Erwin watched the way the streetlights touched her skin, giving her a glow that had nothing to do with glamour and everything to do with being authentically herself. He opened her passenger door for her while she put her leftovers inside. She gave him a tiny surprised smile. "You don't have to do that," she murmured. "Maybe I want to," he replied. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Thank you." He leaned his shoulder against the car door. "I had a really good time." Ruby locked the door and nodded. "Yeah," she said softly. "Me too." They stood there, the night buzzing gently around them, both waiting for the other to speak. Finally, Erwin cleared his throat. "Would it be all right if I called you sometime? Not for sauce, for more conversation." Ruby swallowed, then smiled with a shy tilt of her lips. "As long as you don't knock anything over next time." He chuckled. "I'll do my best." "Then yes," she said softly. "Call me." He stepped back as she got into her car, lifting a hand in goodbye. She waved through the window, then pulled off into the street. Erwin stood alone outside Mama Lupe's, holding his phone, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement, not hope, but the quiet sense that his life had just been nudged onto a different path. A better one. Because tonight wasn't about a festival, or sauce, or a businessman's need to unwind. Tonight was the start of something that neither of them could yet name, but both of them felt it. Warm, bright, unexpected. A beginning. The Four Seasons Ballroom in Los Angeles glittered under warm gold lighting, the kind only wealthy event planners knew how to position at the perfect height. A live jazz trio played near the stage, their soft harmonies floating over the hum of clinking glasses and polite laughter. Photographers moved fluidly around the room like they were choreographed. Snap, step, smile, flash, move on. Every guest carried themselves like a polished piece of silverware. Erwin Parker stood in the center of it all, wearing a navy suit fitted so precisely it looked handcrafted for his shoulders alone. His posture was straight, practiced, and efficient, the posture of a man who had spent years shaping himself into a brand, not just a person. He offered another handshake to an investor, flashed a smile for another camera, nodded through another compliment about his latest philanthropic venture. This was his world, careful, curated, predictable. What he didn't know was that this night would break every piece of predictability he depended on. A photographer angled her camera toward him. Erwin let his lips stretch into that picture-perfect expression he used on magazine covers and investor brochures. His tie was straight, his cufflinks aligned. His hair didn't dare shift, but mid-smile, mid-click, his entire body stilled. Not a gentle pause, not a confused glance. A full, breath-stopping halt. His eyes had landed on someone across the ballroom, someone he never expected to see again. Ruby. She was moving between tables in a crisp black catering vest, a white button-down tucked neatly beneath it. Her hair was pulled back with just a few curls framing her face. The apron tied around her waist couldn't hide the unmistakable curve of her belly. Round, full, alive. She was pregnant, very pregnant. Erwin's fingers loosened their hold on the champagne flute in his hand. Ice shifted sharply inside the glass, rattling against the rim. His throat tightened so abruptly, he almost choked on the air he'd been about to exhale. His smile collapsed. His heartbeat, usually steady and controlled, swung between panic and disbelief. 7 months. That number thundered through his mind before Ruby even looked at him. 7 months since he'd walked out. 7 months without calling her. 7 months of silence. And here she was, pregnant. Ruby tried to pretend she didn't see him at first, but the slight tremble in her hand as she adjusted her tray betrayed her attempt. She pressed on, offering mini quiches to guests who didn't notice the tension draining all color from her face. Erwin took one weak step forward, then another, then froze again, as if his feet had forgotten how to function. He hadn't felt this unsteady since the day he launched his company, while praying it wouldn't collapse under the weight of his own fear. But this wasn't fear of failure. This was fear of truth. A guest bumped his elbow lightly. "Erwin, are you all right? You look like you saw." Erwin didn't hear the rest. His attention locked on Ruby as she shifted to a nearby high-top table. She kept her gaze down, professional and poised, but her hands trembled faintly beneath the silver tray. Guests murmured around them, spreading subtle whispers. "Is that the girl he used to date? I heard he left someone. Something messy. He looks like he's seen a ghost." Erwin swallowed hard, ignoring everything except the woman he couldn't forget even if he tried. Ruby turned to place the tray down, and that movement gave him the full profile of her stomach. That was when the floor tilted under his feet. The room didn't spin. He did. His chest tightened until he thought he might collapse onto a crystal centerpiece. His hand gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. For a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, this moment shook him beyond anything money or logic could control. Ruby looked up only when she had to. Their eyes met across a small distance that suddenly felt like the longest stretch of space he had ever tried to cross. Her dark brown eyes that once looked at him with warmth and affection, were now guarded, steady. She had perfected the expression of a woman who had rebuilt herself from scratch and refused to break again in public. He took one small step toward her. She inhaled sharply. He exhaled, like he'd been drowning. And then finally, he stood directly in front of her. "Ruby," he managed. Her voice was even but quiet. "Good evening, Erwin." He winced at how formal she sounded. She might as well have been speaking to a stranger. He glanced at her stomach before he could stop himself. Ruby shifted slightly, as if bracing herself against the weight of his stare. His tongue tripped over itself, a rare and humiliating sight for a man who normally dominated every room he entered. Ruby answered calmly, not cruelly, but with a firmness that reminded him why he fell in love with her in the first place. 7 months. The words hit him like a blow, direct, clear, unavoidable. 7 months. The exact amount of time since he walked out of her apartment on that rainy day. Ruby watched the realization break across his face. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply waited, quiet, steady, braver than he deserved. Ruby," he stammered. But a coordinator wearing a headset stepped in suddenly. "Server, we need you near the back buffet for the next rotation." Ruby nodded. "I'll be right there." The coordinator left. Ruby gathered her tray to move. "Ruby, wait, please," Erwin said, his voice cracking in a way that startled even him. She hesitated, just for a second, but she didn't collapse. She didn't soften. "I'm working, Erwin," she said, meeting his eyes with a calm that cut deeper than anger. This isn't the time. He felt helpless. The man who usually had the answers, the strategies, the plans, was now scrambling for footing. "Can we talk, just for a moment?" he whispered. She glanced behind her, duty calling her again, and shook her head gently. "Not here." Then, before he could respond, she walked away. Her steps were steady. His breathing was not. He watched her disappear behind a row of tables, moving gracefully despite her advanced pregnancy. Every part of him wanted to run after her, but something stronger held him back, guilt. For the first time in 7 months, he felt every consequence of his past decisions slam into him at once. A voice inside him screamed, "That's your child. That's your family. That's the life you walked away from." His heart pounded. His throat tightened. The room muffled again, nothing but Ruby's silhouette flashing through his memory. He stood frozen as a server brushed past, lightly nudging his arm. It was such a small contact, but it jolted him back into the present. He whispered to himself the truth he now couldn't deny. 7 months since I left her. A punchline from the universe, cruel and poetic. The narrator inside the scene would have said, "Billionaires think they can control everything, until life reminds them that human hearts don't follow profit margins." Erwin ran a hand slowly through his hair, exhaling in a broken, shaky breath. The reality was too big to swallow, but there it was, standing in front of him in that ballroom. Ruby was pregnant. And he knew, deep down painfully, that the timing lined up too perfectly to be anything but his child. He took one step backward, accidentally bumping a cocktail table. A glass wobbled dangerously, but didn't fall. He barely caught it, steadying it just in time. It was almost symbolic. His life was wobbling, and he wasn't sure he could steady the situation so easily. And then, just when he thought he couldn't breathe, the narrator's voice gently pulled the audience, and Irwin's life, backwards. To understand why this moment hit Irwin like a strike to the chest, why Ruby's calmness hurt more than any scream, why a 7-month-old truth could shatter a billionaire's pride, we need to rewind. The ballroom dimmed in his memory. Ruby's silhouette blurred. The present dissolved like mist. Because this story didn't start in a ballroom under chandelier lights, the sound of jazz faded out. Festival drums faded in. It started on a Juneteenth afternoon in downtown Los Angeles with a jar of barbecue sauce, a distracted tech billionaire, and a woman who had no idea how deeply she would change his life. And as the scene rewound fully, the audience was carried back to that first day, sun warm, music loud, laughter bright, where their worlds collided for the very first time. The rewind landed us in the middle of downtown Los Angeles on a warm June afternoon, the air buzzing, with music, laughter, and the unmistakable scent of grilled meat drifting through the streets. Juneteenth in this neighborhood wasn't just a festival, it was a heartbeat. A celebration wrapped in culture, memory, pride, and community. Vendors lined both sides of the street, Black-owned clothing brands, natural shea butter stands, local artists selling, hand-painted jackets, kids handing out homemade bracelets, church members selling slices of cake wrapped in foil. The bass from a nearby drum circle pulsed steadily, leaving a vibration under people's feet. Ruby Matthews adjusted the bright yellow tablecloth on her booth, smoothing out the wrinkles with quick, practiced motions. She had arrived early to help set up the community center's fundraiser stand, a collection of jars filled with her famous chili-infused barbecue sauce and an assortment of homemade pickles she'd made the night before. Her apron was already dusted with flour from helping the food tent next door, and her curls framed her face in soft spirals. She wiped her hands on her apron, stepping back to admire the display. "Okay, y'all behave," she whispered to the jars as if they were students. "Don't nobody fall over today. Please." Nearby, a group of teenagers she tutored ran circles around a bounce house, calling out to her. "Miss Ruby, come see the dance-off later. Miss Ruby, we got the moves ready. Miss Ruby, did you bring the ukulele?" Ruby raised an eyebrow. "Yes, I brought it. But don't drag me into no dance battle I didn't sign up for." They laughed, already halfway down the street. For Ruby, Juneteenth wasn't just an event. It was a reminder of why she worked so hard. Community mattered. These kids mattered. Helping them pass math or get their GEDs meant something. Their futures shaped hers. As she restocked the donation jar and straightened a stack of flyers for her adult education program, a voice behind her announced, "Excuse me, is this where the famous barbecue sauce is sold?" Ruby didn't look up at first. "Depends. Are you ready for the best sauce you've ever tasted?" "I'm prepared to make a life-changing decision," the stranger replied dryly. Ruby turned and blinked. There, wildly overdressed for the festival, stood Irwin Parker. Crisp linen suit, polished shoes, hair perfectly styled, sunglasses that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He looked like someone who had accidentally wandered away from a business seminar and ended up in the middle of a block party. He stared down at her sign, Ruby's chili-infused barbecue sauce, with a curious tilt of his head, holding a small container of free baked beans he'd grabbed from a nearby table. But then he made the mistake. A distracted hand gesture, a shift of his elbow, a small step backward, and Ruby gasped as her neatly stacked flyers flipped into the air like flimsy paper birds catching a gust of wind. They rained down on the concrete, scattering across feet, food, and one unfortunate toddler's snow cone. "Oh, sir, Ruby cried, already racing around the table. "My flyers." Irwin blinked, stunned. I swear I didn't." "You knocked my whole stack into this child's dessert," Ruby scolded, pointing at the toddler now staring at his ruined snow cone with betrayal in his eyes. "I am so sorry," Irwin said quickly, dropping to his knees to help gather the flyers. As he reached for one, he accidentally knocked another stack off the table. Ruby stared at him, hands on her hips. "You are a walking tornado." Irwin, crouched on the ground, gave her an apologetic half-smile. "To be fair, I'm more like a light wind that causes unexpected property damage." Ruby tried not to laugh. She really did. but a tiny snort escaped her nose. "Just pick up the papers." "Yes, ma'am," he replied with mock seriousness. He collected the last flyer from under a food truck wheel, dusted it off dramatically, and handed it to her. "That one has a footprint on it, but I think it adds character," he said. Ruby shook her head, biting back a smile. "Thank you. I think—" "Let me try again," Irwin said, clearing his throat. "I'm really sorry. I wasn't paying attention. Too many spreadsheets in my head." Ruby raised an eyebrow. "Spreadsheets? Yes, I'm, Irwin Parker." Ruby froze. "The Irwin Parker?" He nodded, slightly embarrassed. "I'm in town for a tech conference." She wiped her hands on her apron. "I know who you are. You funded the new computer lab at my community college." "Really?" "That's great to hear," he said, a soft pride warming his expression. "And I heard you gave a keynote on the future of robotics," she recalled. Irwin blinked, impressed she knew that. "Yes, it's a topic with robots," Ruby chuckled. "That sounds thrilling." "It's not," he admitted. "Not compared to this festival." She grinned. "I bet." He looked at the jars of barbecue sauce lined neatly on the table. "So what's the deal?" "You made all these?" "Yes," she said proudly. "It's a fundraiser for our tutoring program." Irwin leaned in as if observing a priceless artifact. "They smell incredible. They taste better," Ruby teased. $50. His eyebrows shot up. "For a jar?" "And I throw in homemade pickles," she added. "Sold," he said immediately, pulling out his wallet. Ruby playfully side-eyed him. "You didn't even ask what flavor." "I trust you," he said before he realized how bold it sounded. Ruby blinked, her smile softening. "Well, thank you." She bagged the sauce and pickles, then handed the bag to him. Their fingers brushed lightly, an accidental but warm contact neither expected. "So," Irwin said, shifting his weight awkwardly, "is there a secret ingredient?" "The love," Ruby answered without missing a beat. Irwin let out a small laugh. "That's a powerful ingredient. And lots of garlic," she added. "A dangerous combination," he joked. A drum circle began nearby, pulling Ruby's attention briefly. Kids danced in a circle, clapping their hands to the beat. Ruby's face glowed as she watched them. "You're great with them," Irwin said quietly. Ruby shrugged but smiled. "They're the reason I get up in the morning. Well, that and needing to pay my light bill." Irwin chuckled. "Relatable," she snorted again. "Is it though?" "More than you think." Ruby studied him for a moment, noticing something she hadn't caught before, a subtle weariness behind. His eyes, the kind that didn't come from lack of sleep but from carrying too many responsibilities. "Are you actually working today?" he asked suddenly, looking around. "I run this booth, yes, but I'm also helping the choir later," she said. "You sing?" "Yep, you." "Oh, absolutely not," he said, horrified. "If I sing, someone will file a noise complaint." "Same energy as those flyers," she teased. He placed a hand over his heart. "Low blow," Ruby chuckled, reaching under the table to grab a small ukulele. "I teach kids simple chords after school. Music helps them focus." "That's really cool," Irwin said honestly. She shrugged again, brushing off the compliment. "It's community work, helps keep teens out of trouble." Irwin nodded, watching her adjust the strings. "Can you play something?" Ruby smirked. "You wouldn't know it." "Try me." She strummed a few chords and sang a line from a gospel tune, her voice smooth, warm, and rich. A few people nearby turned their heads, drawn in by the effortless sound. Irwin blinked in surprise. "Ruby, that's beautiful." "Thank you," she said softly, a small blush creeping into her cheeks. "Oh, do you take song requests?" "Only if you promise not to knock anything else over." "I'll stand very still." She laughed lightly. "I'll think about it." A small pause settled between them. Not heavy, not awkward, just curious, like they were both trying to figure out why speaking to a complete stranger suddenly felt so easy. Do you work in education full-time?" he asked. "I run our community program part-time and work in adult tutoring the rest of the week," she explained. "I like helping people get second chances at life." Irwin's eyes softened. "That's rare." "What's rare?" she asked. "Someone who gives so much without expecting anything back." Ruby crossed her arms lightly. Are you trying to compliment me or distract from the flyer incident? Both, he admitted. She playfully shoved his arm with the back of her hand. You're something else. Good something? He asked, hopeful. We'll see, she replied, cheeks lifting in another smile. Before either could speak again, a volunteer shouted from across the street, Ruby, we're starting the raffle in 10. Come get your ticket stash. She sighed. Duty calls. Erwin nodded. I should probably explore more of the festival. But neither moved. Ruby cleared her throat. Thank you for buying the sauce. Thank you for not pressing charges over the flyers, he shot back. She rolled her eyes. Goodbye, Erwin. Goodbye, Ruby. As she walked toward the raffle booth, she glanced over her shoulder just once, just enough to see him still standing there, watching her with a look she didn't yet know how to interpret. Erwin remained in place long after she disappeared into the crowd. He held the jar of sauce like it was a museum piece. He wasn't sure what had just happened. All he knew was that it felt like something important had shifted inside him. When he finally headed back toward his hotel, he replayed their conversation again and again. He couldn't remember the last time someone spoke to him without any pretense, just pure honesty and humor. Later that night, Ruby lay on her couch, exhausted but smiling. She held her phone, staring at the new contact saved as Erwin P. She'd typed it twice, making sure she didn't imagine their connection. Across town in a luxury suite with a view of the LA skyline, Erwin lounged on his bed, staring at Ruby, M in his phone like he didn't understand how 3 hours at a festival could leave such a deep imprint. Two very different worlds. Two very unexpected smiles. Two people replaying the same moment, quietly wondering what would come next. Ruby didn't expect to hear from him that night. She figured it would be one of those fun moments with a stranger's stories she would tell her friends. Later, something light, something funny, something she could laugh about over leftover mac and cheese. But halfway through washing her dishes, her phone buzzed on the counter. Erwin P., thank you again for not having me banned from all future festivals. Ruby bit her lip, smiling as she wiped her hands clean. She typed back quickly. Ruby, you came close. The toddler whose snow cone you destroyed nearly pressed charges. A second buzz. Faster than she expected. Erwin P., I am still traumatized by the look he gave me. Ruby snorted, covering her mouth as she laughed. She tapped her counter thoughtfully, then sent, Ruby, you handled it better than I thought. Most people run when kids glare at them. Erwin's reply came almost instantly, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. Erwin P., I don't run. I brisk walk. Sometimes. Ruby shook her head. He's ridiculous, she said to herself, but she didn't stop smiling. The conversation continued, easy and natural, messages bouncing between them about music, food, the festival, and the fact that Erwin really couldn't dress casually to save his life. By the time Ruby went to bed, she found herself holding her phone against her chest for a moment, wondering why a stranger she met at a booth felt so familiar. Across the city, Erwin lay in his hotel bed, staring at the ceiling. He should have been preparing for the next day's keynote. Instead, he scrolled back through the messages, rereading Ruby's jokes, her warmth, the small glimpses into her world. He wasn't used to being curious about someone, but tonight, curiosity was pulling at him like a gentle string he couldn't ignore. The next few days unfolded like a dance neither of them planned, but both naturally fell into. Erwin texted early in the mornings, Erwin P., are you teaching your class today? Ruby replied between tutoring sessions. Ruby, yes, and one of my adults brought banana bread, so today is a blessed day. Erwin sent a picture of a cup of overpriced hotel coffee. Erwin P., this cost me $8 and tastes like regret. Ruby laughed so loudly her students looked up. Ruby, that's what you get for staying in fancy places. That's not coffee, that's mortgage water. Another day, he messaged her during his lunch break. Erwin P., do you always carry a ukulele around? Or was that a festival-only situation? Ruby, I keep one at the center. Music helps people open up, and you'd be surprised how many grown men want to learn one chord just to impress someone. Erwin P., I'm offended you didn't offer to teach me. Ruby, you knocked over my flyers. That was your first impression. He typed back, Erwin P., so how many flyers must I rescue before I earn a lesson? Ruby leaned against the classroom door, smiling. Ruby, we'll negotiate. Their conversation flowed seamlessly, neither forced nor formal, but steady, consistent, and warm. Every message nudged them closer, not because they were trying, but because it felt natural. One Thursday afternoon, after 3 days of steady messaging, Erwin asked, "Erwin P., can I take you out for coffee? Nothing fancy, just coffee, conversation, no spreadsheets." Ruby stared at the message. She wasn't the type to move fast, and she reminded herself she didn't know him well. But something about his presence, his awkward charm, his surprising honesty, made her feel safe enough to say yes. "Ruby, all right. There's a cafe on Sunset. 3 p.m. Erwin arrived at 2:40 p.m. He got there early on purpose. He didn't want Ruby to see him rushing, or stumbling, or making another impression like the flyer disaster. He picked a table near the window and waited, tapping his fingers on the cup of iced tea he ordered. He didn't drink tea, but the coffee here was too strong for his taste. Ruby arrived at 3:07 p.m., humming as she walked up to the counter. The cashier greeted her like she was a regular. Erwin watched her order, hair pinned loosely, tote bag slung over her shoulder, wearing a simple lavender blouse that somehow made her glow. When she turned around and spotted him, she offered a shy wave. "I thought you'd be late," she joked as she sat. "I was early," he admitted. "Of course you were. You look like a man with reminders for his reminders." Erwin laughed. "You're not wrong." Ruby sipped her drink, a simple iced latte with cinnamon, and looked around. This place is usually quiet, good for grading papers, or meeting billionaires who knock things over. "You're not going to let that go, are you?" he asked. "Nope." Their conversation drifted effortlessly. He asked about her adult students, and she explained the challenges of working with people who were rebuilding their lives after setbacks. She told him how proud she was when one of her students passed their GED after months of hard work. "You make them sound like heroes," Erwin said. "They are," Ruby replied. "Sometimes all people need is someone who believes in them." He looked at her then, really looked. Ruby didn't say things for effect. She said them because they were true. "What about you?" she asked. "What made you go into tech?" Erwin leaned back, exhaling softly. "Honestly, I was good at it, and people told me it was the best path. I guess I followed the voices around me instead of the voice inside." Ruby rested her chin on her hand. "And what's the inside voice say now?" "That it's tired," he admitted. "And that maybe I don't know what happiness looks like." Ruby didn't judge him, didn't tease. She simply nodded, as if she understood something deeper. "Then you have work to do," she said softly. He chuckled. "That sounds like homework." "It is," she grinned. "Life homework. You can't outsource it." They sat there long enough that the sun began slipping behind the buildings outside. When they finally stood to leave, Ruby slid the leftover sugar packet into his jacket pocket. "For your $8 coffee trauma," she teased. Erwin smirked. "I'll cherish it forever." They stepped outside. The breeze felt lighter. Ruby waved goodbye first, then turned toward her car. Erwin watched her walk away, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, hope. A few days later, Ruby sent him a text. "Ruby, we're having open study hours tonight. If you really want to see what I do, come by." Erwin hesitated for exactly 1.2 seconds before replying, "Erwin P., send the address." Her neighborhood was nothing like the glossy districts he usually frequented. It was lively, filled with murals, music, and kids riding bikes. The building itself was a converted storefront with mismatched chairs and posters promoting literacy programs. As soon as Erwin walked in, Ruby's students stared. One whispered, "Miss Ruby brought a fancy one." "Be nice," Ruby warned, holding back a smile. Erwin observed quietly as Ruby explained fractions to an older woman who apologized repeatedly for being slow. Ruby stopped her each time, her hand warm on the woman's shoulder. "You're learning. That's not slow, it's steady," she said gently. Erwin watched Ruby coax confidence out of people the way musicians coax music from instruments. One of the teenagers elbowed Erwin. "You like Miss Ruby?" Erwin blushed so quickly the kid snickered. "She's impressive," he managed. "Facts," the teenager nodded. "But if you mess with her, we all fight you." "I'll keep that in mind," Erwin replied, hands raised. When Ruby finished her session, she walked over, folding her arms with a playful smirk. "You survived." "Barely," he said. "Your students are intense. They're family." The way she said it made Erwin's chest tighten. Things grew naturally from there. Sunday afternoon, Ruby invited him to a neighborhood cookout. Erwin arrived overdressed again, slacks, button-down, polished shoes. Ruby burst out laughing the moment she saw him. "Sir, this is a cookout, not a fundraiser." She made him change into an extra t-shirt she kept in her trunk. "You owe me," she said. Aunt Tasha immediately spotted him and shouted, "Ruby, why you bring this tall man who looks like he's allergic to seasoning?" Erwin choked on air. Ruby doubled over in laughter. Kids climbed on him. Someone handed him a plate stacked so high with ribs he held it like it was fragile glass. Ruby watched him try, really try, to fit in. Even when he messed up, he smiled through it. Later, she whispered, "You did good." He whispered back, "I followed your lead." A week later, Erwin invited her to a low-key visit to his company headquarters. He kept his staff limited that day. No big presentations, no flashy tours. Just quiet corners, tech prototypes, and his small favorite workspace on the top floor. "This is where I hide from everyone," he said. Ruby ran her fingers along a table filled with circuit boards. "I thought you'd have robots marching around." "No marching," he said. "I'm still teaching them manners." She laughed. "Good luck with that." For dinner, Erwin chose a small restaurant he called Casual, but when the waiter described the menu, Ruby stared at him, confused. "Why is my salad talking like it graduated from Harvard?" she asked. Erwin sank in his chair. "I thought this was normal casual." "It's not," she said, laughing. "But it's okay. We'll make fun of it together." He relaxed instantly. Halfway through the meal, he leaned back and watched her talk, hands moving, eyes bright. Ruby saw him watching and smiled shyly. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "Just enjoying this." The night ended with him walking her to her car. She leaned against the hood, arms crossed gently. "Today was nice," she said softly. "Yeah," he replied. "I didn't realize I needed this." Ruby tilted her head. "Needed what?" He exhaled. "Something real, someone real." She looked away for a moment, overwhelmed in a way she didn't expect. "I'm not perfect, Erwin," she whispered. "I don't want perfect," he answered. "Just honest." She lifted her eyes slowly. "Honest scares me. Letting someone in isn't easy." He stepped closer, not invading her space, but enough that she felt his presence. "I know," he said. "I'm still learning how to do that, too." For once, neither cracked a joke. Neither added a shield. Neither deflected. The quiet was honest. Vulnerable. True. The narrator's voice settled over the scene. They thought they had time to figure things out. They didn't know how quickly feelings grow, or how quickly mistakes can follow. Ruby finally whispered, "Good night, Erwin." "Good night, Ruby." As she drove off, Erwin stood in the parking lot long after her car disappeared. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, the honest one under a dim streetlight, was the first sign that their futures had already shifted. They were falling, slowly, deeply, and without realizing it. The first time Erwin stepped into Ruby's backyard in Inglewood, he wasn't prepared. He had braced himself for a small family cookout, Ruby's words, but when he passed through the wooden side gate, he realized Ruby's definition of small was very different from his. The yard overflowed with laughter. Music floated from a speaker near the grill. A long table covered with aluminum pans stretched across one side. Ribs, chicken, greens, cornbread, macaroni, grilled shrimp, and peach punch so sweet it could probably fix heartbreak. Kids ran in zigzags across the lawn, dodging uncles arguing over dominoes, and aunties waving fans as if they were conducting the whole neighborhood. Ruby stood near the grill, turning ribs with one hand and high-fiving a cousin with the other. She looked at home here, like this was the soil her soul grew from. Erwin paused near the gate, momentarily overwhelmed. Ruby spotted him and waved him over. "There you are," she shouted above the music. "I was starting to think you got lost." "I almost did," he admitted. "Your house is easier to find than all of this." She grinned, handing him a plate before he could even set his feet fully in the yard. "Eat. If you don't eat, the aunties will think you're judging their cooking." "I would never do that," he said quickly, eyes widening. "That's exactly the right answer," Ruby laughed. They walked toward the grill, and Erwin immediately felt all eyes on him. Not in a hostile way, more like a curious test. Ruby sensed it and whispered, "Relax. They tease everybody. It's how they say hello." Right on cue, an auntie in a floral dress called out, Ruby, you didn't tell us you were bringing a tall one. Another shouted, look at this man standing like he's waiting for a job interview. A third chimed in, Ruby, hand him a rib so he loosens up. Ruby nearly spilled her tongues from laughing. Erwin smiled nervously, managing a small wave. Hi, he offered. A toddler suddenly tugged at his pant leg. A round-cheeked little girl with 2 fluffy puffs stared up at him with big eyes and proudly announced, Hi, Uncle. Erwin blinked. Oh, hello? The whole yard erupted in laughter at his confusion. She called you Uncle, Ruby teased. Congratulations, you're officially family adjacent. Erwin crouched carefully, so he didn't ruin his shirt. Do I respond to that? The toddler nodded solemnly. Uncle, eat. Ruby handed him a rib immediately. She's not wrong. Erwin took a bite, half willing, half terrified, but the moment the sauce hit his tongue, he froze. Oh, he murmured. Ruby raised an eyebrow. Good? No, that's not good. I don't have the vocabulary for this. Welcome to real cooking, she replied, patting his shoulder. As he ate, Ruby moved around the yard effortlessly, stopping to hug a cousin, laughing, with a neighbor, grabbing tongs for the grill, brushing crumbs off a child's face. Erwin watched her like she was the sun at the center of everything. People leaned toward her instinctively, drawn to her warmth. He felt a softness well up inside him, a slow, steady ache made of admiration and something he didn't dare name yet. After a while, Ruby's mother, short, sweet-looking, but with eyes that saw right through people, walked up to Erwin and handed him a fresh plate. You're Erwin, she said, not a question. Yes, ma'am. You rich? Erwin nearly choked. Well, doesn't matter, she said. Are you kind? Ruby's mother wasn't a woman who wasted time. I try to be, Erwin answered honestly. Try harder, she said, giving him another rib. She deserves that much. Before he could respond, she turned and walked away. Ruby appeared beside him seconds later. Let me guess, she gave you a life lesson and a plate at the same time? Ruby asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Yes, Erwin said. I think she did. That's her love language. They moved toward the porch swing after Ruby finished helping with the food. She gestured for him to sit. He obeyed, sinking into the cushioned seat. Ruby sat beside him, legs folded under her, still holding a towel from the grill. Thank you for coming, she said quietly after a moment. Thank you for inviting me, he replied. The yard bustled with noise, but here on the swing, it felt strangely private, like the world blurred just enough for them to see each other clearly. Erwin looked ahead before speaking. I've never been to anything like this. My family, we didn't do loud gatherings, or gatherings at all, really. Ruby listened, eyes softening. My parents hosted fancy dinners, he continued, but everything was stiff, quiet, like. The sound in the house was set to low volume, and what did little Erwin do in that quiet house? She asked gently. Read, built things, stayed out of the way. He hesitated. They weren't unkind, just emotionally distant. Ruby nodded slowly. So, you didn't grow up around all this what? He asked. She gestured to the yard. Noise, love, people who argue but hug 5 minutes later. Food that isn't measured in calories, life. Erwin looked around again. Kids chasing each other, uncles arguing about who cheated in dominoes. Someone laughing so hard they wheezed, music blending into background laughter. No, he admitted. I didn't grow up with this. But I like it. Ruby watched his profile as he said it. Something about the sincerity in his voice made her chest warm. You're doing great, by the way, she said. Really? Yeah, she laughed. You didn't run away, so that's a win. They sat in easy silence before Ruby nudged his knee. Want to see something? He nodded. She hopped up and motioned him toward a group of family members standing in a circle, heads bowed. A prayer was starting before the next round of food was served. Ruby pulled him gently beside her. Just stand with me, she whispered. He did. Voices rose, not formal, not forced, but warm and layered with sincerity. They thanked God for family, for protection, for joy, for food, for the ability to gather in peace. Erwin didn't know what to do, so he bowed his head too. Ruby squeezed his hand quietly during the amen. That small touch hit him harder than any speech ever could. 2 weeks later, it was Erwin's turn to bring Ruby into his world. They flew to Sonoma for a weekend wine tasting. Ruby had never been to a vineyard. She stepped off the paved walkway and stared at the rolling hills covered in grapevines. "It's pretty," she said honestly. Erwin looked relieved. "You like it?" "I do," she said, then immediately broke into a grin. "But don't expect me to swirl anything in the glass like I'm taking an exam." He laughed. "I wouldn't dream of it." At the first tasting table, the hostess explained the notes of the wine. Ruby blinked. "Notes? Are we drinking or listening to a concert?" The hostess blinked. Erwin swallowed a smile. Later, Ruby sniffed a glass dramatically. "I smell grapes." "That's correct," the hostess said, confused. Erwin leaned in, laughing. "You're going to get us kicked out. I'm keeping it real." Ruby shrugged. Wine doesn't need vocabulary. He couldn't argue with that. The next day they hiked up Mount Tamalpais. Erwin had brought expensive gear, professional boots, trekking poles, and a fancy hydration backpack. Ruby wore a t-shirt, leggings, and Nikes. When she saw his setup, she burst out laughing. "Are you hiking or moving into the mountains?" "These are standard items," Erwin defended. "Standard for who? Superheroes?" They bickered playfully all the way up the trail. At one point, Ruby pretended to interview him. "Sir, can you tell our viewers why your boots have more functions than my phone?" Erwin sighed dramatically. "They are Bluetooth compatible." Ruby froze. "They what?" "Kidding," he said quickly. She whacked him lightly with her water bottle. "Don't play with me." At a clearing, they stopped to sip water. The San Francisco Bay shimmered in the distance. Ruby stood quietly, absorbing the view. "This is beautiful." Erwin watched her. "Not the horizon, not the trees, not the trails. You're beautiful," he whispered, before he could stop himself. Ruby turned slightly, cheeks warm. "Don't start with lines." "It wasn't a line," he said honestly. Their eyes held for a moment longer than either of them planned. Something softened between them, a steady warmth settling into something deeper. That night over dinner, a simple outdoor meal beside the vineyard, Ruby swirled her fork through her pasta thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "your world is quiet, controlled, organized. Is that good or bad?" He asked. "Neither," she said. "Just different. You live by rules. My family lives by pass the plate, pray it's good." Erwin chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Your world feels more alive. And yours is calming," she said. "I didn't know I needed calm sometimes." He looked at her with something soft and reverent. "And I didn't know I needed color." Ruby smiled at that. "You saying I'm colorful?" She teased. "I'm saying you're everything my world was missing." She blushed, gaze drifting to her plate. It was new, the softness between them. New, but steady. Unloud. Unrushed. Real. At the end of the weekend, as they waited for the car to pick them up, Ruby leaned against a stone fence lining the vineyard. Erwin stood beside her, shoulder brushing hers, their bodies falling into a natural closeness. "Thank you for this," she said quietly. "I should be thanking you," he replied. "Your world shows me what living looks like, and yours shows me what resting looks like," she said. They stayed like that, sharing a silence that wasn't empty but full of something unnamed but undeniable. It wasn't forced. It wasn't rushed. They were simply falling into a rhythm, hers full of laughter and community, his full of quiet and intention, and realizing neither rhythm felt complete without the other. They weren't in love yet, but they liked each other deeply, comfortably, with laughter and softness stitched into every shared moment, a gentle romance forming around the edges of two lives slowly intertwining. By the time they boarded the flight home, Ruby fell asleep against his shoulder without thinking twice, and Erwin let her, not because he didn't want to move, but because some moments shouldn't be disturbed, not when they feel exactly right. Falling in love didn't happen in a dramatic swoop for Ruby and Erwin. It didn't arrive with fireworks, long speeches, or slow-motion walks on the beach. It settled in quietly through the things most people overlook, leftovers in the fridge, text messages that turned into calls, inside jokes whispered during boring errands. Their love grew out of routines, ordinary routines that slowly tied two very different lives together. It started with sitcom nights. Ruby had been binge-watching a retro comedy series on her couch, one of those shows where the laugh track came a second too early and every character had a favorite diner booth. She was finishing the last 5 minutes of an episode when her phone buzzed. "Erwin P., what are you doing?" She typed back with one hand while the other polished off her bowl of popcorn. Ruby, laughing at jokes older than both of us. Erwin P., do you mind company? Her eyebrows lifted. She typed back, Ruby, sure. Doors open. 5 minutes later, Erwin knocked anyway. I know you said to come in, he explained when she opened the door, but I didn't want to barge into your house like a lost delivery driver. Ruby snorted. Come on in, polite man. He stepped inside, glancing around with an appreciation that wasn't fake. Your home feels warm. That's because the heater's on high, she said, tossing him a blanket. Sit. He obeyed, sinking into the couch beside her. Ruby instantly noticed 2 things. 1, he sat stiff, like the couch was a job interview chair. 2, he didn't know how to hold a throw blanket. Relax, she said, tugging the blanket and draping it across both their laps. The moment the blanket covered them, Erwin exhaled and leaned back. This is nice. That's the point. 20 minutes passed before Ruby realized Erwin was actually invested in the plot, making small reactions under his breath. She shouldn't trust him, he muttered at one point. At another, he reached for popcorn without asking, not realizing it was a relationship milestone in Ruby's world. She looked down at his hand in the bowl and smirked. You're comfortable, huh? I thought we were sharing? He asked innocently. She nudged him. You're lucky you're cute. His ears reddened slightly, but he didn't argue. That was the beginning. 2 days later, Ruby brought Erwin to her sister's house for a family Saturday. Her nephew, a fast-thinking kid with a competitive streak, challenged Erwin to chess. Erwin straightened his posture, suddenly serious. I should warn you, I was a captain of my high school chess club. The kid smiled confidently. I'm not scared. Ruby whispered to Erwin, if you beat him, you'll be on dishes for the next 3 Sundays. Erwin hesitated. Oh, and if you lose too obviously, she added, he'll know. Erwin leaned forward over the board. So I have to lose, convincingly? Yes, Ruby nodded, arms crossed. The match began. Erwin let the kid win piece by piece, but sprinkled in enough real moves that the boy felt challenged. At one point, the kid narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Are you letting me win? Erwin froze. Ruby covered her mouth to keep from laughing. No, Erwin insisted. You're defeating me with great skill. The kid studied the board, then nodded proudly. I knew it. Erwin sighed in relief as he lost his queen. Ruby whispered, You're good at this. I've trained for diplomatic situations, he whispered back. This counts. When the game ended, the kid jumped up. I beat the billionaire. Ruby's sister yelled from the kitchen. Good, make him wash a plate for losing. Erwin smiled nervously. I don't mind helping. Ruby shook her head. You're passing every community test. I'm trying, he admitted softly. And we see that. The next week, Ruby decided it was time for Erwin to learn something every grown person should know, how to cook. She invited him to her kitchen after work. Ingredients lined the counter, smoked sausage, beans, rice, onions, peppers, and seasoning. Tonight, Ruby declared, tying a towel around his waist like an apron. You're learning how to make red beans and rice. Erwin looked down at the towel. We're starting with humiliation. She slapped the spoon into his hand. We're starting with chopping. He chopped onions too slowly, too neatly, too carefully. Ruby stood behind him, guiding his hand. No, loosen your wrist, she said. Onions aren't glass. I'm aware, he muttered, squinting as the onion fumes hit his eyes. She laughed. They're humbling you. When he tossed onions into the pan, they sizzled and popped. Erwin jumped back. They're attacking me, he said dramatically. They're reacting, Ruby corrected. They're violent. Ruby nearly folded over from laughing. After the onions softened, she guided him through seasoning the pot. He sprinkled a tiny amount. Boy, what is that? She asked. A normal amount. That's enough for 1 pea. Try again. He tried again, this time pouring too much. Sir, she yelped. He winced. I panicked. They spent the next hour laughing, correcting, stirring, tasting, and adjusting. Their arms brushed more than once. Their shoulders bumped naturally. At one point, Ruby reached for salt, and Erwin reached at the same time. Their hands met. They froze for a second. Ruby softened. You're doing good. I like being here, he murmured. She didn't answer with words. She just touched his wrist gently before handing him the spoon again. By the time they finished, the kitchen smelled rich and savory. Erwin took the first taste and closed his eyes. "Ruby," he whispered. "This is incredible." "It's our pot," she corrected. Erwin looked at her with that soft gaze again, the one that made Ruby's stomach flutter. It was a simple moment, but it felt like a step into something deeper. A few evenings later, Ruby took Erwin to Venice Beach. She liked it better at night, when the crowds thinned, the breeze picked up, and the boardwalk lights glowed like quiet lanterns. A saxophonist played near the shoreline, slow and soulful. Ruby's fingers curled around Erwin's hand before she could think about what she was doing. He gently squeezed back. The music wrapped around them easily. Some couples swayed to it, others strolled along the sand. Ruby stopped walking, turning to face Erwin. "Dance with me," she said softly. "Here?" he asked, looking around. "Yes, here." He hesitated only a second before stepping closer. Ruby rested her hands on his shoulders. Erwin's hands hovered for a moment before settling cautiously at her waist. They swayed to the saxophone, a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to sync with their breathing. "Ruby," Erwin said quietly. "Yes, I don't think I've ever felt this peaceful." Ruby didn't look away from his eyes. "That's a good sign." They continued dancing, closer now, the night breeze brushing past them. For a moment it looked like Erwin might say something serious, something big, because he held her a little tighter, like he was trying to memorize what it felt like. Ruby whispered, "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he said. "Everything's right." A warmth spread through her chest. The saxophonist switched to a sweeter tune. Ruby tucked her head lightly against Erwin's chest. His chin brushed her hair. If someone had walked by, they might have thought they were a couple celebrating. An anniversary, not two people still learning each other. The moment wasn't a proposal, wasn't a confession, wasn't dramatic. It was something better, real. From that night on, their relationship fell into soft patterns. Erwin kept juice in his fridge because Ruby liked it. Ruby kept his favorite tea in her cabinet, even though she didn't drink it. He would drop by her place after late meetings just to sit on her couch. She would bring him food after long workdays. They cooked together often, watched shows together, talked about everything and nothing. He learned the names of the kids in her tutoring class. She learned the quirks of his company's board meetings. They weren't making big promises. They weren't labeling anything. But their lives were slowly braiding together. One Sunday morning, Ruby woke up to the smell of coffee and something frying. She walked into her kitchen to find Erwin at the stove, wearing the same towel apron she used on him during their cooking lesson. "You're stealing my apron idea?" she asked. "Borrowing," he replied. "You taught me how to cook." "I taught you how to chop onions," she corrected. He smiled over the pan. "Progress." He made scrambled eggs and toast, simple food, slightly uneven, a little burnt on one edge. Ruby ate every bite. "You trying to win points?" she teased. "Yes," he said without hesitation. She shook her head, smiling wider than she meant to. Their routines deepened emotionally, too. Late at night, they had conversations people only have when trust takes root. Ruby spoke about her dream of opening a funded, fully staffed community learning center. Erwin confessed he didn't want to be the billionaire people admired for headlines. He wanted to build programs that mattered, not just corporate write-offs. Ruby's voice softened. "You're better than you think." Erwin swallowed hard. "So are you." These weren't romantic lines. They were truths spoken between two people who saw each other clearly. When they attended events together, cookouts, tutoring sessions, casual, neighborhood gatherings, people naturally treated them like a couple. Ruby didn't correct them. Erwin didn't either. One afternoon at the community center, a group of kids tugged at Ruby's sleeve. "Miss Ruby," one said, pointing at Erwin, "your husband's here." Erwin froze mid-step. Ruby blinked. "Kids," she said gently. "He's not my—" But Erwin stepped forward with a playful smile. "I'll take the compliment." Ruby stared at him quietly, and he met her eyes. It wasn't a joke. Not fully. When they went to his office together, a quiet employee whispered, "Is that your wife?" Erwin felt something warm in his chest at the sound. Their worlds had labeled them without paperwork. Not because of legalities, because of energy, because of presence, because of commitment that didn't need announcements. The narrator put it best. They were married in everything but name, woven into each other's days before either realized how deeply they had settled in. They didn't call it love yet, but they lived like people who were already choosing each other. Every single day felt like a promise they didn't know they were making, and neither noticed the cracks forming at the edges of their fairy tale. Not yet. For months, Ruby and Erwin had been living in an easy rhythm. Warm dinners, soft routines, late-night conversations that felt like building a life brick by brick. On most days, everything looked steady from the outside, but inside those routines, tiny misunderstandings slipped into the corners. Quiet ones, barely noticeable. The kind of things most couples overlook until they can't anymore. Those cracks began in ways neither intended. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon at the community center. Ruby had spent the morning handling calls about funding for her adult education program. One of the grants she applied for needed matching sponsorship, and she'd been working tirelessly for months to secure reliable support. Erwin picked her up for lunch, wearing a light button-down and the relaxed expression he reserved only for her. "You look beautiful," he said instinctively as she walked toward him. Ruby exhaled. "Thank you. Long day already." "Well," he replied, kissing her forehead, "I'm here to make the rest easier." He meant it. She believed him. But as they sat in a cozy little taco spot in Inglewood, her phone buzzed. Twice, grant committee emails and a message from her program coordinator. Ruby sighed, reading the update. "The fundraiser didn't reach the amount we needed." Erwin looked up from his burrito. "How much are you short?" "About 7,000, she said, rubbing her temples. He blinked. "Ruby, you know I can just write the check." She froze. He said it casually, kindly, the way someone might offer to help move a box or carry groceries up the stairs. But Ruby's throat tightened. "You don't need to fix it for me," she said gently. "I'm not fixing anything. I'm supporting your work. You're trying to shortcut something that matters." Erwin frowned. "How is letting me help a shortcut?" "Because I need sustainable funding," she said. "Not handouts. My help isn't a handout." "I know," she answered. "But if every time we're short, you swoop in with money, the program will never stand on its own." Erwin's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "But isn't the point to keep it running? She stopped him with a look. "Erwin, you don't understand. My work isn't about saving a program. It's about showing people they aren't dependent on charity." He leaned back. "I'm not charity." Ruby sighed. "I didn't say you were. I said sustainability matters. To me." He didn't understand. She didn't know how to explain it better. They finished lunch in strained silence, each trying not to let the misunderstanding grow larger than it was. A week later, the tension rose again, this time during a high-profile business dinner in Beverly Hills. Erwin had asked Ruby to attend, not as decoration, not as an accessory, but because he genuinely wanted her by his side. He liked how grounded she was, how she made everything around her feel real. He had warned her it would be moderately fancy, but Ruby suspected his version of moderately was very different from hers. She wore a simple emerald green dress that hugged her shape and brought warmth to her complexion. Erwin smiled when he saw her. "You look incredible," he whispered. "And you look like a man who owns the building," she teased. Inside, the restaurant buzzed softly with expensive conversations. Investors in tailored suits murmured by the bar. The host greeted Erwin by name. Ruby stayed close by his side. She didn't feel intimidated, but she did feel watched. Halfway through the dinner, one of Erwin's investors leaned toward him with a smirk. "Beautiful woman you've got there," he said. "Perfect addition to your image tonight." Ruby heard it. Every word. Her jaw tightened. Erwin responded politely, "Thank you," but he clearly didn't like the phrasing either. Later, when the waiter brought wine samples, Erwin attempted to lighten the mood. "This one pairs beautifully with your beauty," he said softly. Ruby smiled out of politeness, until the waiter announced, "Aged dessert wine, sir. Very sweet." She blinked. Dessert wine? She hadn't eaten anything sweet. She glanced at Erwin with an uneasy smile. "Oh, my mistake," Erwin chuckled. "I asked for the red. They brought this instead." The joke didn't land. The moment stung in a subtle way Ruby couldn't explain. She tried to shake it off, but the seed of tension grew in the quiet. The next Sunday, Ruby invited Erwin to her church for a fundraiser. She warned him it was casual, community-centered, no tech billionaire performances necessary. He showed up wearing a navy suit and tie. "Baby, this is a bake sale, not a Senate hearing," Ruby teased. He tugged at his tie. I wanted to look respectful. You look like you're about to negotiate a merger with the ushers, she joked. Inside, the congregation welcomed him warmly. First-timers always did. Kids waved, elders greeted him with hugs, and the choir gave him a welcoming nod as he settled beside Ruby. At the bake sale tables, Ruby handed him a slice of sweet potato pie. This is tradition. Try it. Erwin picked it up gingerly. Is this vegan? Ruby stared at him. Sweet potato pie with marshmallows on top? She asked slowly. What part of that says vegan? He winced. I just didn't know. It's pie, Erwin, not a lab experiment. Some people close by overheard and laughed kindly. Erwin flushed, embarrassed. Ruby softened. I'm teasing you, she said gently, patting his chest. Eat it. Erwin took a bite and loved it. But the moment lodged in Ruby's memory. He was trying so hard to adapt, yet sometimes it felt like he didn't truly understand the heart of the community she came from. Ruby wasn't angry, just tired. Christmas arrived, and with it, a gathering at Erwin's family home, a sprawling estate dressed in elegant lights and understated silver decor. Ruby felt out of place the moment she walked in, though she tried not to show it. Erwin's relatives welcomed her warmly enough, but the warmth came with a hint of performance, like she was being watched, evaluated, measured. At one point, a relative hung mistletoe above Ruby and Erwin's heads and called out loudly, Go on then, kiss, it's tradition. Everyone watched. Ruby felt her cheeks burn. She wasn't a performer. She didn't know anyone to show, but she played along, giving Erwin a small kiss on the cheek. People clapped. Someone laughed. What a lovely couple. Ruby smiled politely, while her heart felt tight. Later, she told Erwin quietly, That made me uncomfortable. I know, he said, looking guilty. I should have stopped them. Ruby nodded slowly. She understood he felt torn between his upbringing and hers, but she wondered if he understood how much weight moments like that carried for her. Despite the misunderstandings, Erwin deeply loved Ruby, more deeply than he'd ever admitted to himself. But that love warped into insecurity in ways he didn't expect. It happened gradually. Whenever Ruby attended community gatherings, people teased her about her rich man. They didn't mean any harm, but Erwin could feel the distinction. He felt like he was stepping into a world where he was always slightly out of rhythm. Always the formal one. Always the outsider. And when investors whispered, She's amazing, but how do you keep someone like Ruby around? Erwin's chest tightened. He laughed off the comments, but they stayed with him. The subtext whispered, She's outgrowing you. She's more loved in her world than you are in yours. She doesn't need you. Erwin began to fear that while Ruby flourished, he wasn't enough. Ruby, on the other hand, felt like she constantly had to translate herself, her culture, her jokes, her community values. She loved Erwin, but she didn't want to be an interpreter in her own home. The cracks widened quietly. The breaking point of Chapter 2 came unexpectedly, during what should have been a peaceful night at Santa Monica Pier. The evening breeze carried the scent of ocean salt. Street vendors flipped shrimp on grills and handed out cotton candy to children. Ruby held Erwin's hand as they walked toward the pier's edge, humming a tune under her breath. Erwin had been quiet all evening. Ruby tried to bring him back into her warmth. Sing with me, she said playfully. Erwin blinked. Here? Yes. Why not? She strummed a little rhythm on her ukulele. She carried it on weekends and began humming softly. A few passers-by smiled at the sound. A couple even nodded their heads to her gentle melody. Erwin's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Ruby, he whispered, leaning close. Maybe not here. She stopped. Why not? We're in public, he said quietly. People are watching. She frowned. So what? It's just, can we not make a scene? Her heart dropped. A scene? I'm humming. I know, he said quickly. I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong, just maybe tone it down. Ruby stared at him. What about the times you talk about stock prices at barbecues? Or when you brag about Silicon Valley bathrooms having mood lighting? I support you in your world. Why can't you do the same for me? Erwin opened his mouth and closed it. He didn't know how to answer. Ruby wasn't done. You love when I sing for you in private, she said softly, her voice trembling. Why is it shameful when other people hear it? It's not shameful, he said quickly. What? She whispered. He couldn't answer. The silence between them felt thicker than the ocean mist. Ruby finally walked ahead, leaving him a few steps behind. Erwin stood frozen, staring at the cracks in their fairy tale that he'd never noticed before. When they finally left the pier, they walked in silence, no holding hands, no humming, no gentle sway of love between them. Back at her car, Ruby said quietly, "I don't want to be someone you hide." Erwin swallowed hard. "I'm not hiding you. I hope you believe that," she replied. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back, opening her car door with trembling fingers. "We'll talk later," she whispered. The drive home was quiet. Too quiet. That night, as he lay staring at the ceiling in his penthouse, Erwin finally realized something. Love wasn't the problem. Communication was. Fear was. Pride was. And those things, if left unchecked, could break even the strongest bond. Have you ever felt misunderstood by someone you love? Tell me if you're more like Ruby or more like Erwin. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you're still here following their journey. The silence after the Santa Monica Pier incident didn't crash all at once. It seeped into Erwin and Ruby's relationship like slow, creeping fog. They were still together, still going on dates, still waking up in the same bed some mornings, still laughing, sometimes, still in love. But the warmth that once held their days together had cooled, not frozen, just dimmer. Little moments that used to feel effortless now felt like walking across loose stones. Erwin noticed it first without admitting it to himself. Ruby wasn't humming around him as much. He wasn't holding her hand quite as often. Their conversations had grown shorter. Their silences had grown louder, and he didn't know what to do with that. The first rumor that shook Erwin came 2 weeks after the pier incident. He was in a sleek conference room inside his company's headquarters, preparing for a product presentation. Engineers set up the projector. Assistants typed frantically. Erwin reviewed notes on a new AI model he planned to launch the following quarter. As he stepped out to grab coffee, he passed a small group of colleagues near the break room. They didn't notice him approaching. One whispered, "Is he still with that girl from LA?" Another answered, "I keep hearing things." Erwin froze mid-step. He didn't hear the rest, just those 5 words. They clung to his ribs like hooks. "I keep hearing things." About Ruby? What things? From who? Is that why she's been distant? He walked away before they saw him. He spent the rest of the meeting nodding at slides he didn't actually see. That single sentence replayed like a drumbeat inside him. That evening, Ruby invited him to a small gathering at the community center, a game night fundraiser. Families played bingo. Teens set up a lemonade table. Aunt Tasha had made a pan of mac and cheese Ruby was proud of. Erwin said he'd come. He even meant it. But as the afternoon turned into evening, his chest tightened every time he thought about those whispered words. When Ruby called, "Are you still coming?" he stared at his computer screen, pretending to organize files. "I'm sorry, I can't make it," he said. "Work ran late." Ruby paused on the other end. "Okay, maybe next time." Her voice wasn't angry, just disappointed. Erwin couldn't face her with a mind full of suspicion, not when she deserved better than his swirling thoughts. But this was the beginning of the distance she would start to feel. 2 days later, Erwin decided to make it up to her. He made a reservation at a cozy Italian restaurant in Westwood Ruby loved. Their garlic knots and always teased him about over-twirling his pasta. He arrived early, choosing a table near the window. Ruby walked in a few minutes later, wearing a soft blue blouse that brought out the warmth in her skin. Her curls framed her face beautifully, and for a moment his heart tugged painfully with affection. "Hi, baby," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Erwin smiled, but Ruby saw the strain in his eyes. She saw the stiffness in his shoulders. She felt the distance he wasn't acknowledging. "How was your day?" she asked gently. "Fine," he answered quickly. She blinked. "Just fine?" "Yes, work was fine." Ruby frowned. Erwin wasn't a man of one-word answers. He always shared details, even when the day was uneventful. But tonight, he looked trapped inside his own head. They ordered drinks. Ruby tried to lighten the mood. "You're quiet," she said softly. "Too quiet." "This isn't like you." Erwin stared at the flickering candle. "I'm just tired. Tired from work, or tired of us?" she asked carefully. His eyes snapped up, startled. "What? No. That's not what I meant." Ruby leaned forward. Then talk to me. Don't shut me out. Erwin opened his mouth, but the words did not come. He wasn't ready to admit he was afraid. Afraid of losing her, afraid she was drifting away, afraid the rumors held truth, afraid he wasn't enough. Instead, he said nothing. The silence settled between them like a wall. Later that week, another comment reached him, this time during a casual lunch at the office. A team member mentioned seeing Ruby at a grocery store in Inglewood and said casually, "I heard she's got a lot going on lately." People talk. Erwin's fork hovered mid-air. A lot going on. What does that mean? Why didn't she tell me? His stomach clenched. The colleague continued, "Nothing serious, just, life stuff." They didn't mean harm. They weren't implying anything specific. But Erwin latched onto the uncertainty like a lifeline. He didn't ask for details because he didn't want to appear paranoid. But inside, he was spiraling. One Saturday evening, Ruby invited him to her family's house for dinner. Her mother was making fried chicken, and cousins were coming over. Ruby wanted to make things feel normal again, close again. Erwin agreed. Then he canceled 2 hours before the meal. "Sorry, something came up," he said blandly over the phone. Ruby stared at the wall of her bedroom, emotionally exhausted. Something came up. Something always came up lately. Something that wasn't her. "Are we okay, Erwin?" she finally asked. "Yes," he said quickly. "Of course we are." But the truth sat heavily in the pauses between his words. A few days later, Ruby asked if they could go out for dinner again. She didn't want the distance to grow. She believed in communicating, in working things through. She wanted the man who once looked at her like she painted sunlight in the sky. They met at a small Ethiopian restaurant Ruby loved. Erwin sat stiffly across from her again, staring at the tablecloth, fiddling with his spoon, glancing at his phone even though no one had texted him. Ruby watched him silently, then finally said, "Erwin, look at me." He raised his eyes slowly. She inhaled deeply. "I need the truth." "What's going on?" "I told you. I'm stressed." "That's not the truth," Ruby said gently. "Not the whole truth." He swallowed. "I just have a lot on my mind." "Is it us?" she asked. "Are you second-guessing us?" Erwin tensed. "Why would you say that?" "Because you're here but you're not. You're beside me, but your eyes are somewhere else." Erwin looked away. Ruby felt her throat tighten. "Do you still see me as your partner, Erwin? Or am I just someone who fits into your life when it's convenient?" "It's not like that," he muttered. "Then what is it like? Please tell me. I'm trying." Erwin opened his mouth again, but the truth stayed locked behind fear and pride. Instead, he said quietly, "I don't know." Ruby sat back. "You don't know? Everything just feels complicated," he said finally. "And I'm part of the complication?" He looked at the floor. That silence answered her question more clearly than words ever could. Ruby blinked away the tightness in her eyes. "If you're confused, Erwin, talk to me. Not your coworkers, not your fears. Me." Erwin's jaw clenched at the mention of coworkers, but Ruby hadn't accused him. She didn't even know what he had overheard. She was simply speaking in general. "Ruby, I don't want to fight," he said gently, quietly. "I don't either," she whispered back. "I just want my partner back." The dinner continued in choppy conversation, short answers, forced small talk, awkward pauses. When they left the restaurant and reached her car, she turned to him one more time. "Are we okay?" she asked again, softer this time. Erwin looked at her, really looked at her, her warm eyes, her kind expression, her hope, and for a second he wanted to spill every fear bottled inside him. But the words refused to form. "I don't know," he said. Ruby stepped back slightly, the answer sinking deep. "Okay," she whispered. "Then I guess we're both trying to hold on to something with different hands." He drove her home. She leaned her head on the window. He watched the road too closely. When they reached her apartment, Ruby unbuckled her seatbelt slowly. "Good night," she said. He nodded. "Good night." Neither leaned in for a kiss. Neither reached for the other. Neither said "I love you," though it hovered unspoken between them. Ruby walked up the stairs alone. Erwin sat in the car longer than he intended, staring at the steering wheel. For the first time since meeting Ruby at Juneteenth, Erwin felt like he was losing something he didn't know how to protect. He just didn't realize yet that his silence, his fears, and his pride were pushing her further away, not protecting him, not protecting them. The rain started earlier than usual that Friday afternoon. Thick, heavy drops that smacked against windows and turned the Los Angeles sky into a muted gray sheet. Ruby stood in her bedroom, slipping on a warm sweater and jeans, tying her hair back in a loose knot. She had a kids' event to lead at the community center, a literacy night she'd been planning for weeks. Normally, Erwin would have asked if he could drive her. Normally, he would have said, "Send me pictures," or teased her about outshining the teaching staff. Normally, the two of them would have hugged in the hallway like a quiet ritual. But nothing felt normal anymore. Erwin texted her in the morning, "Can we talk later?" Not, "How's your day?" Not, "Good morning." Just, "Can we talk?" Ruby's stomach tightened. She told him to come after lunch. Now, as she tightened her shoes, she heard the knock on the door, soft, hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to be there. Ruby walked to the living room and opened the door. There he was. Erwin looked drained. Not physically, emotionally. His hair was damp from the rain, his eyes tired, his shoulders slightly slumped. He wasn't his usual put-together self. He looked like a man carrying too many thoughts without knowing where to put them. "Hey," Ruby said quietly. "Hey," he answered. She stepped aside so he could enter. He wiped his shoes on the mat and walked in slowly, as though the apartment felt unfamiliar now. Ruby closed the door and turned to face him. "You said you wanted to talk." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I did." She waited. She wasn't going to make this easy for him, not out of pride, but because communication mattered. If he wanted to talk, he needed to start. Erwin took a breath. "Ruby, I've been unhappy." The words landed like a crack in glass. Ruby blinked. "Unhappy? In what way?" He rubbed the back of his neck. His voice wavered. "I don't know how to explain it." "Try," she said softly. He looked at the floor instead of her eyes. I don't think I can do this anymore." Ruby's lips parted. For a moment, she didn't process the sentence. "Do what?" she whispered. "This," he repeated. "Us." The room felt like it tilted. Ruby steadied herself against the edge of the couch. "You want to break up?" she breathed. He closed his eyes. "I think so." "You think so?" Ruby stepped forward. "Erwin, that's not an answer. That's confusion. It's the best I can give," he muttered. "But why?" Ruby's voice cracked. "What changed? We've been building something. I don't feel like myself anymore," Erwin said quietly. Ruby stared at him. "Is this about that night at the pier? Because we can talk about that." "It's not just that," he said. She felt heat rise behind her eyes. "Then what is it?" Erwin shook his head helplessly. "I don't know. Everything feels complicated." Ruby hated that word. Complicated. It meant nothing. It meant everything. It meant he was hiding something he didn't know how to voice, or didn't want to. "You have to give me more than that," she said, her voice trembling. "You owe me that much." Erwin swallowed. "I don't want to keep hurting you." "You're hurting me right now," Ruby snapped, her voice breaking. He looked away. Ruby's heart pounded in her chest. "Erwin, answer me honestly. Is this because I asked you to move in with me?" Erwin stiffened. Ruby covered her mouth, realizing. "It is that, isn't it?" "No," he said quickly. But the way his eyes flickered told her the truth. He was lying, not to hurt her, but to shield himself from admitting what scared him. "It's because I asked you to build something real," she whispered. "It scared you." Erwin took a step back, defensively. "That's not fair." "No?" Ruby asked. "Then tell me the truth. Because you haven't been here, not emotionally, for weeks. You've been pulling away. You've been somewhere else in your head." His jaw clenched. Ruby felt her voice shake. "Erwin, I love you. I have loved you through awkwardness, insecurity, misunderstanding, everything. But I can't read your mind. If something feels wrong, you talk to me." He swallowed hard. "I'm trying to—" "No," she said. "You're trying to leave." That hit him. Hard. He opened his mouth, closed it again, searching for words that wouldn't form. Ruby wiped her cheek quickly. She hadn't realized tears were already running. "What happened to us?" she whispered. "We used to talk. We used to laugh. You used to look at me like—" Her voice trailed off. Erwin stared at the rug. "I felt disconnected." "From me?" she asked, incredulous. "From everything." Ruby shook her head. "Erwin, you're going through something. I get that. But you don't just quit on someone because you're overwhelmed. You talk, you communicate, you let me in. I don't know how to let you in, he murmured. Then learn, she said sharply, because I can't fix what you won't tell me. Erwin's shoulders sagged. Maybe you shouldn't have to. Ruby froze. What's that supposed to mean? It means. He took a breath. Maybe you deserve someone who doesn't complicate your life. Ruby stared at him as a tear slid down her cheek. Are you trying to convince both of us that walking away is noble? Erwin didn't answer. The silence cut through her. Say what you really feel, Ruby insisted. Say it. Erwin's voice was barely audible. I don't think I can do this anymore. Ruby covered her face with her hands as another tear slipped through. She rarely cried, not like this, not from heartbreak so sharp it stole her breath. She dropped her hands and stepped close to him, eyes blazing with hurt. I gave you everything, she whispered. My time, my trust, my love, and the first time things get difficult, you fold. That's not what's happening, Erwin said weakly. Then what is happening? She demanded. He was silent. Ruby let out a frustrated, heartbroken laugh. Unbelievable. She walked toward the coat rack and grabbed her jacket. Where are you going? He asked, his voice unsteady. To lead the kids' event I told you I had today, she said, pulling the jacket over her sweater. The one you didn't ask about, the one you don't care to understand because you're too busy convincing yourself that leaving is easier than talking. Ruby. He reached for her arm. She pulled away instantly. Don't. He froze. Ruby grabbed her umbrella and car keys. Before opening the door, she turned back to him. I believed in us, she whispered. I believed in you. I believed we were building something, and you're throwing it away because you're scared. Erwin looked pained. I'm not scared. Yes, you are. You're scared of needing someone. You're scared of not being perfect. You're scared of loving someone who challenges you. His throat tightened. He didn't deny it. Ruby shook her head slowly, heartbreak trembling through her shoulders. You said you didn't want to hurt me. But Erwin, you are. She opened the door. Rain immediately splattered across her shoes. Erwin stepped forward. Ruby, wait. She turned back, eyes red, voice soft but fierce. Don't you dare walk away from me, Erwin Parker. For a split second, he hesitated. She could see the battle in him, the part of him that loved her fighting against the pride swallowing him whole. Erwin lowered his eyes. He did not move. Ruby's heart cracked cleanly in two. She stepped outside into the rain. The door closed behind her. Erwin stood there, still as a statue, staring at the place where she'd been standing. The rain's sound grew louder through the window. His chest tightened, breath shaky, hands trembling, but he didn't chase her. He didn't run after her like she deserved. He let her walk away. And it was that moment, not the pier, not the silence, not the awkward dinners, that moment where his pride cost him the woman who loved him. Erwin stayed frozen until the sound of Ruby's car engine faded. Then he collapsed onto the couch, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. The rain outside fell harder. Inside him, something broke. The rain didn't let up for hours after Ruby drove away. The downpour soaked the streets, washed along curbs, and blurred the world outside windows as if even the sky wanted to hide its face. Ruby barely remembered the drive to her mother's house. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, her breath catching in quick bursts she kept trying to swallow down. Each red light felt like a small mercy, time for her to breathe, wipe her cheeks, and whisper, hold it together. Just hold it together until you get home. By the time she pulled up in front of her mother's house, the front porch light was already on. Her mother always left it on when she knew Ruby was coming. She stepped out of the car, gripping her umbrella tight as she hurried through the rain. The moment she reached the door, it swung open. Her mother pulled her inside before she could speak. Baby, what happened? You look. Ruby collapsed against her, shoulders shaking as she finally let the sobs come. He left me, she whispered. He walked away. Her mother held her head against her shoulder, rubbing her back gently. Oh, Ruby, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Ruby clung to her mother like the ground beneath her had given way. Inside, two cousins were on the couch watching TV. They muted it the moment they saw Ruby crying. Her aunt stepped out of the kitchen with a bowl of macaroni in her hands, eyes widening. What did he do? Her aunt asked softly. Ruby couldn't answer. She just cried harder. Her mother guided her to the couch, urging her to sit. Ruby sank into the cushions, covering her face with both hands. Her aunt placed the bowl of macaroni on the table and sat beside Ruby. "Sweetheart, you don't have to talk right now. Just breathe." Ruby nodded shakily. Her mother brought her a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Someone placed a warm cup of tea in her hands. Someone else adjusted the pillows behind her. It was comfort done the way her family always did it, quick, practical, and full of quiet love. After several minutes, Ruby finally found her voice. "He said he didn't think he could do this anymore," she whispered. "He couldn't even explain why." Her mother frowned. Men sometimes avoid their own emotions so much they think leaving is easier than dealing with them. "He looked lost," Ruby said softly, "like he couldn't even tell himself the truth." Her aunt squeezed her knee gently. "You cannot build a home with a man who runs from storms instead of facing them with you." Ruby closed her eyes as another tear slipped down. She stayed there for hours, wrapped in her blanket, listening to her. Family's soft reassurances. No lectures, no judgment, just presence. Her cousins brought her juice. Her aunt offered to make cornbread. Her mother kept rubbing her back like she used to when Ruby was a little girl. By the time morning came, Ruby had cried herself into an exhausted sleep. Ruby stood barefoot in her bathroom, staring at the pregnancy test on the counter. Her breath froze in her chest. 2 bright lines. Not 1. 2. She blinked several times, thinking maybe the rain had streaked her vision that night and she was imagining things now. But the lines stayed. Clear. Unmoving. Certain. She sank onto the closed toilet lid, hands cupping her mouth. A baby. She was carrying Erwin's child. Ruby's first wave of emotion was heartbreak, raw, sharp, overwhelming. She felt the breakup all over again, like it was happening for the first time. Her second wave was fear, real, startling fear. She had never imagined raising a child alone. But then, beneath the heartbreak and fear, something warm flickered. Life. Hope. A new beginning she hadn't expected. Ruby pressed a hand to her abdomen, tears spilling again, but softer this time. "Hey there," she whispered to the tiny life she couldn't yet feel. "It's just us now. And we're going to be okay." She breathed in deeply. "You're going to be loved," she promised. No matter what. Ruby sat in that bathroom for a long time, letting the waves settle into something stronger, resolve. She didn't call Erwin. She didn't tell him. She wasn't hiding it out of spite. She was choosing peace over chaos. If he wanted to be part of her life, he would have stayed. If he wanted to fight for her, he would have run after her that day. But he didn't. So Ruby made a decision that felt heavier than any choice she'd made before. She would raise her baby with love, stability, and joy, even if she had to do it alone. And she refused to let regret poison the journey. The rain eventually cleared, but Erwin's mind didn't. After Ruby left, his penthouse felt like an echo chamber, every room too big, every surface too clean, every corner too quiet. He stood in the living room for over an hour after getting home, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of downtown Los Angeles, usually his reminder of success, felt hollow. What had he done? He should have run after her. He should have explained himself. He should have stayed. But instead, he'd let his pride lead him home like a leash. Erwin walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. Everything inside looked untouched. He closed it again. He sat on the couch, got up, walked to the window, sat again. His phone rang twice, messages from the office asking about funding meetings. He ignored them. He showered, but didn't remember doing it. He made coffee, then poured it out. He tried to sleep, but only stared at the ceiling. The next morning, he woke up feeling heavier than the night before. Work didn't distract him. Numbers didn't distract him. Meetings didn't distract him. Everything, every email, every presentation, every handshake felt like static noise behind a single thought. She's gone. After a week of silence, a coworker casually mentioned a mixer, suggesting Erwin get fresh air and meet new people. Erwin agreed, not because he wanted to, but because doing nothing made the apartment feel unbearable. He attended. He talked. He smiled, mechanical smiles. Someone introduced him to a woman who worked in business consulting. She was kind, sharp, and clearly interested. They exchanged numbers. Erwin deleted it the moment he got home. He went on 2 casual dates over the next month. On one of them, the woman laughed in a way that made him freeze. Ruby laughed like that. On another date, someone asked him, "What kind of partner are you looking for?" He paused too long. Ruby had asked him that once. He'd never answered her well then either. Every date ended the same. Sorry, I'm not what you're looking for. They weren't the problem. He was. It wasn't until month 2 that the first rumor reached him. He overheard it after a meeting, 2 colleagues whispering near the conference room door. Did you hear about Ruby? Yeah, someone told me she's been going through something. I heard she's not alone. No details, though. Irwin's heart stopped. Not alone? He tried to act like he hadn't heard anything. He walked past them calmly, entered his office, and closed the door. Then he sat down and gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned pale. What did that mean? Who said that? Was she dating someone? Was she seeing someone new? Was she happier without him? For 2 hours, Irwin stared at the wall, chewing on worry. But he never called. He never texted. He convinced himself Ruby would think he was trying to crawl back after leaving. And his pride, always his downfall, kept him silent. The second rumor was worse. He overheard it in the hallway, after a board meeting. Did you know Ruby might be expecting? Seriously? I don't know. Someone mentioned it, but nothing confirmed. Irwin froze in the hallway. His chest tightened. His breathing slowed. His vision blurred around the edges. Expecting? Expecting what? His hands shook as he walked back into his office. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, feeling the floor disappear beneath him. Ruby, pregnant. His mind raced. Was the rumor real? Was the timing possible? Was the baby his? He felt the air leave his lungs in a sharp, painful rush. Irwin slid down until he was sitting on the floor, back against the door, staring at the ceiling. A memory hit him, with painful clarity, Ruby's voice in the rain, her hand on her stomach after their argument, her saying, I believed in us. Irwin's chest ached. Ruby, he whispered to the empty room. What did I do? But again, he didn't call. He told himself he didn't want to disrupt her life. He told himself she deserved peace after the hurt he caused. He told himself she had probably moved on. But deep down, he was terrified. What if it was his child? What if he had walked away from Ruby and their baby? The thought haunted him for weeks. While Irwin tried and failed to move on, Ruby transformed her days into a routine built around purpose, community, and the future growing inside her. She worked closely with her students. She spent weekends preparing the nursery room at her mother's house, even though she wasn't showing much yet. She attended prenatal appointments, holding her mother's hand and sometimes crying quietly during ultrasounds. Every heartbeat she heard from the monitor strengthened her resolve. She talked to her baby each night. We're going to be okay, she would say softly. You're already loved. Her cousins teased her lovingly. Her mother fed her twice the amount she used to. Her aunt told her stories of motherhood, reminding her how powerful women can be, even through heartbreak. Ruby had moments of loneliness, moments of remembering Irwin's laugh, his awkwardness, how he used to kiss her forehead on mornings they woke up together, but she refused to let her heart live in the past. Her journey was moving forward, for her baby. 7 months after that rainy breakup, Irwin sat in his penthouse at 1 a.m., staring at a single baby outfit he had bought secretly from a boutique. He didn't know if Ruby was truly pregnant. He didn't know if the baby was his. He didn't know anything anymore. But holding that tiny outfit in his hands made something inside him drop, hard and sudden. He whispered to himself, I walked away from my family. The truth struck him like a punch to the chest. He had not lost Ruby by accident. He had lost Ruby because he let fear control him. He let pride guide him. He let insecurity ruin what could have been a future. Irwin covered his face with his hands, fighting against the realization. He wasn't just mourning Ruby. He was mourning the family he might never meet, the moments he might never experience, the baby he might never hold. And he had no one to blame but himself. Ruby committed to motherhood with clarity, strength, and peace, determined not to depend on someone who had already walked away. Irwin, alone in a penthouse filled with echoes, finally understood the depth of what he lost and what he might have abandoned without knowing. The morning light slipped through the curtains of Ruby's old bedroom at her mother's house, warming her cheeks as she slowly sat up, one hand pressing gently against her growing stomach. 7 months along, she was carrying her son with a balance of tenderness and strength she didn't even know she possessed. Her mother knocked once and eased the door open. You up? Baby girl?" Ruby smiled. "Trying to be." Her mother chuckled, walking in with a small tray. "I figured you might need this. Grits, fruit, and that tea you like." Ruby exhaled softly. "Mama, thank you. I can't carry your little boy, but I can at least make sure you're fed," her mother replied with a grin. Ruby took a slow sip of the tea, rubbing her belly in small circles. Hector shifted inside her, and she laughed quietly. "He's definitely awake. Strong already," her mother said proudly. "Like his mama." Ruby didn't respond aloud, but she hoped her son would be strong, for his own journey, not because of what she had gone through. By mid-morning, Ruby was dressed, moving around the kitchen, helping. Her mother prepared dishes for the baby shower later that afternoon. Her cousins bustled around the house, balloons bouncing against the ceiling, streamers being taped to walls. The air hummed with scents of baked chicken, sweet rolls, and peach cobbler. As Ruby adjusted a centerpiece on the table, her cousin entered holding a sign that read, "Welcome baby Hector." Ruby breathed in sharply. "I didn't think y'all would go all out like this." Her cousin shrugged. "Girl, please. You give so much to everybody else. Let us show love back." That simple statement hit her harder than she expected. Friends, choir members, women from church, neighbors, co-workers, everyone she'd touched with kindness over the years showed up. They brought gifts, food, jokes, warm hugs, gentle prayers. When Ruby walked out into the yard, decorated in blues and greens, the applause made her eyes water. "Oh Lord," she whispered, covering her face while laughing. The pastor's wife hugged her tightly. "You are not alone, Ruby. This child is born into a village that already loves him." Ruby nodded, unable to speak for a moment as her throat tightened. At the gift-opening table, her aunt held up a tiny baby onesie that read, "Future Scholar." Ruby burst into laughter. "Y'all know he can't read yet, right?" "Start early," her aunt said proudly. Her cousin set down a stack of diapers. "This is 2 months' worth. You're welcome." Ruby raised an eyebrow. "So, what about months 3 through 18? The cousin waved her hand dismissively. "Baby steps." Everyone chuckled. Another friend brought out a diaper cake decorated with baby socks and little blue bows. Ruby leaned forward. "This is too cute to take apart." Her mother said, "Oh, it's coming apart. Don't get sentimental yet." The laughter surrounding her felt like balm on a wound that had scarred over but still throbbed. For the first time in a long time, Ruby felt something close to freedom. Freedom from grief. Freedom from replaying Erwin's absence. Freedom from wondering why he hadn't called. She realized something quietly comforting. She wasn't waiting for him anymore. The next day at church, Ruby sat in the pew as the choir prepared for a joyful hymn. Her church family, who had known her since she was a little girl, treated her with the gentle reverence given to expectant mothers. Some members placed hands lightly on her shoulder as they passed. Others whispered blessings. But the most cherished moment came when the choir director paused rehearsal to announce, "Ruby, sweetheart, we want to pray over you and your baby." Ruby blinked, surprised. "Oh, okay, thank you." They formed a circle around her at the front of the sanctuary. Their voices rose, layered and warm, each one offering hope, strength, and protection. As the prayers drifted upward, Ruby felt her chest expand with emotion. She inhaled deeply, letting the peace settle into her bones. Afterward, the choir director squeezed her hand. "Forgiveness, Ruby. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it frees you from carrying a weight that shouldn't be yours." Ruby nodded slowly, her eyes stinging. She knew the director was right. She had to let go, not for Erwin, but for Hector. Late in the evenings, Ruby sat on her bed with her journal open across her lap. She wrote out her fears, her hopes, her regrets, her joys. Some nights she wrote, "I forgive you, Erwin." Other nights she couldn't. So she wrote, "I'm trying." She didn't want bitterness to become Hector's inheritance. She didn't want silence to feel like punishment. She didn't want her hurt to become her son's legacy. So each night she whispered gentle affirmations to the life inside her. "You're going to know love. You're going to grow in peace. You're going to have stability. You're not going to grow up in the shadow of anyone's mistakes." Forgiveness was no longer about Erwin coming back or explaining himself. It was about freeing her heart to focus on motherhood without carrying the debris of the past. Ruby wasn't one to sit still. Even with swollen feet and frequent naps, she threw herself into her studies and community work. She spent afternoons at the library, researching nonprofit management and grant writing. Her dream of building an educational nonprofit was finally taking shape. Her mother would peek into the room and say, "You know you could rest, right?" Ruby smiled. "I'm resting. Mentally." But she wasn't pushing herself recklessly. She just believed in the power of creating something meaningful for her son to inherit. At the community center, the staff insisted she sit during meetings, fussing over her when she tried lifting boxes. "You're carrying the next generation, Ruby," one coworker joked. "At least let us do the heavy lifting." Ruby laughed. "Okay, but only because I'm outnumbered." She spent mornings answering emails, afternoons creating lesson plans, and evenings reviewing her nonprofit model. Everything felt purposeful. Around her 8th prenatal appointment, Ruby received a letter from the hospital. Financial office confirming partial coverage for her delivery and postpartum care. She frowned at the numbers. "Mama, this doesn't look right." Her mother came over, reading the letter. "Looks right to me. Somebody helped." "Who?" Ruby asked. Her mother shrugged. "Could be someone from church. Could be someone from the community center. People love you." Ruby nodded slowly. But something tugged at her. It felt intentional, thoughtful. And the amount was something only a person with real financial means could give quietly. Ruby ran her thumb over the page, feeling a prickle of suspicion, but she folded the letter and put it in a drawer. She wasn't going to chase answers. Whoever helped her did so out of kindness, and she wasn't going to complicate the gesture. Across the city, Irwin sat in his penthouse staring out at the skyline as evening light faded. His face was tired, unshaven, drained. Work wasn't the refuge it once was. Every success felt hollow. He tried attending executive dinners. He left early. He tried going to mixers. He couldn't focus. He tried going to the gym. He ended up sitting on the bench staring at the wall. A single thought haunted him. I wish she had told me. But he knew why she hadn't. He had walked away, not her. He had closed the door, not her. He had chosen pride, silence, and fear. Irwin replayed the moment of the breakup in his mind nearly every night. Ruby, his tears, the way she asked him not to walk away, and the way he did anyway. The guilt felt heavier now that he believed she was carrying his child. He almost called her 24 times. His finger hovered over her name. His chest tightened. His breath stuttered. But fear won every time. Not fear of Ruby, fear of the truth. Fear that she would confirm it. Fear that she would tell him he didn't deserve a place in the baby's life. Irwin pressed his palms against his eyes. He was losing sleep, losing focus, losing parts of himself he didn't know he valued until they were gone. Back in Inglewood, Ruby sat on her porch swing one warm evening, humming while rubbing circles over her belly. The sun had just dipped beneath the rooftops, leaving streaks of lavender and gold across the sky. Her neighbor passed by and waved. "Almost time, huh?" Ruby smiled. "A few more weeks." Her neighbor beamed. "You're glowing." Ruby laughed. "More like waddling, but I'll take it." When the neighbor walked off, Ruby leaned back, letting the swing rock gently. For the first time since the breakup, she felt steady, aware, grounded, hopeful. She whispered, "Hector, thank you for choosing me." A tear rolled down her cheek, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Her phone buzzed on her lap. She looked down. A weather alert. Not Irwin. She exhaled slowly in relief. She wasn't ready to hear from him. Not yet. Not until she could speak to him without anger. Not until she could listen without breaking. But she also felt something new growing inside her, right alongside Hector, a quiet forgiveness. Not a forgiveness that excused Irwin's choices. Not a forgiveness that invited him back, but one that released her from the debris of heartbreak. She breathed out, long and slow. "I'm not carrying pain into motherhood," she whispered. Hector shifted inside her as if responding. Ruby, surrounded by laughter, prayers, and a growing belly, blossomed into a mother shaped by community love. Irwin, surrounded by glass windows and silence, descended into a life shaped by regret. Every day that passed widened the emotional distance between them while tightening the biological one. The Four Seasons ballroom glowed under warm chandeliers as the annual Tech Charity Gala swung into motion. Attendees in tailored suits and shimmering gowns drifted between donation tables, champagne displays, and camera lines. Laughter floated in waves across the marble floors, and every corner buzzed with business talk disguised as philanthropy. Irwin adjusted his cufflinks for the 4th time, exhaling sharply through his nose. Nights like this used to give him confidence. He knew this world, one of handshakes, soundbites, and polished smiles. But today, his collar felt tight. His chest felt heavier than usual. His mind wasn't here. He hadn't been fully present anywhere for months. A board member clapped his shoulder. "Glad you made it, Erwin. We needed your presence tonight." He forced a smile. Wouldn't miss it. But his voice carried that thin, stretched quality he couldn't hide anymore. As cameras flashed, Erwin positioned himself between two investors for a photo. He pulled a practiced smile. But the moment the shutter clicked, something in the room tugged at his attention. Something quiet but magnetic. A faint sound. A soft voice. A shift in the air. He turned his head slightly, confused by the sudden chill up his spine. And then he saw her. Across the ballroom, balancing a tray of hors d'oeuvres, dressed in a catering uniform that hugged her form gently. Ruby. She was farther along than the last time he imagined her. Her belly round. Her walk careful. Her posture calm. His heart slammed so hard against his ribs he almost choked. The investor beside him whispered, "You okay? You look like you've seen a—" Erwin stepped back before the man finished. The tray in his hand, champagne glasses for guests, tilted dangerously. He caught it just in time, stopping the spill. But his eyes stayed locked on her. Ruby's eyes lifted and collided with his. The world tilted. The noise dulled. The crowd blurred. There she was. The woman he'd loved. The woman he'd hurt. The woman he couldn't stop thinking about. And the child he might have abandoned before ever knowing. Erwin struggled to breathe. Ruby hadn't planned to work tonight. She'd taken a catering job weeks ago to save extra money before maternity leave. The shift was long, the uniform wasn't flattering, and her feet already ached. But she pushed through. She had responsibilities. She had Hector coming. She had goals she wanted to reach without depending on anyone. She didn't expect to see Erwin. Not here. Not tonight. But when she lifted her head and saw him, perfect suit, perfect posture, the same familiar tilt of his jaw, her chest tightened. She steadied her breath and whispered, "Keep working, Ruby. Keep working." Erwin didn't walk toward her at first. He froze. His hand tightened around the tray so hard the glasses clinked. His brain raced through questions he wasn't ready to face. Is the baby mine? Why is she here like this? Why didn't she tell me? Does she hate me? He inhaled, shaky. Then he moved. The crowd thickened between them, but he pressed forward anyway, weaving, through clusters of attendees who glanced at him in confusion. He reached her just as she placed fresh appetizers on a small table near the center of the ballroom. "Ruby," he whispered, breathless. She didn't jump. She didn't fumble. She simply turned to him calmly, her expression unreadable. "Erwin." Her voice was even. Smooth. Controlled. He stared at her stomach, trying not to, but he couldn't stop. You're pregnant," he said, his voice cracking. Ruby lifted her chin. "I am. How far along?" He hated how shaky he sounded. He sounded like a man learning how to speak again. She looked at him, steady and quiet. 7 months. The word slammed into his chest. 7 months. 7 months since the breakup. 7 months since he walked away. 7 months since he let her cry in the rain. Erwin's heart dropped so fast he felt dizzy. He swallowed hard. "Ruby, is the baby? Please don't ask questions you already know the answer to," she said gently. He blinked rapidly, his throat closing. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ruby looked down, adjusting her tray. "I tried. At first." His breath hitched. "You did?" "Yes." She kept her tone calm. "But you weren't in a place to hear me, and I'm not someone who forces myself into a life I wasn't invited into." Erwin felt something break open inside him. "Ruby, A supervisor passed behind Ruby. "Table 5 needs refills." Ruby nodded. "Got it." She turned to go, but Erwin stepped forward instinctively. "Wait." She paused. "Please," he whispered. "Please. Just give me a moment." Ruby inhaled slowly, and then nodded toward a quieter corner near the large windows overlooking the city. They walked there silently. Ruby rested the tray on a nearby counter to give her arms a break. Erwin stood across from her, visibly shaken. "You look—" He stopped himself. Compliments didn't belong here. "Not tonight." Ruby filled the silence for him. "I look different." Pregnancy does that. I didn't mean—" He stopped again. "I'm trying not to say the wrong thing." She lifted an eyebrow. "You've always had that problem." He let out a breathy, broken laugh. "Yeah." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry," he finally said. The words were quiet, but heavy. "For everything." Ruby looked at him. Really looked at him. "I needed that. Not because it fixes anything, but because it's overdue." Irwin's shoulders fell. "I know." Her gaze softened. "Irwin, what happened between us was painful, but I'm not angry anymore. I had to let it go. For me, for the baby. The baby. His son." Irwin's eyes drifted to her stomach again, his chest tightening. Ruby shifted slightly, instinctively covering her belly with one hand. The action wasn't defensive, it was protective. He swallowed hard. "Is it a boy or girl?" Ruby hesitated, then answered, "A boy." Irwin closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing it. "A boy." She nodded once. "What's his name?" he whispered. "Hector," she said. He repeated it under his breath, the name shaking something loose inside him. "Hector." Another long silence. Ruby studied him. "Irwin, I'm not trying to punish you. I'm raising him in love. He is already surrounded by it." He nodded. "I'm glad, truly. But I also need you to understand." She steadied her voice. "I didn't keep him from you. I stopped trying to chase someone who didn't want to be involved." Irwin's face crumpled. "Ruby, that's not true. I wanted—" "No," she said softly. "You wanted the idea of us. But when things got hard, you ran. And I can't build a life on a foundation that cracks under pressure." Her words were calm, but they hurt more than anger ever could. Irwin forced himself to take responsibility. "You're right. I handled everything wrong. I was afraid. I let pride decide things for me." Ruby pressed her lips together. "Fear doesn't excuse the damage, Irwin, but it explains why you weren't ready." He nodded, almost ashamed. After a moment he asked quietly, "Did you ever think about reaching out again, after those first attempts?" "I thought about it," Ruby admitted, "but I kept choosing peace over pain, and calling you felt like choosing pain." Irwin stared at the floor. "I deserve that." "No," Ruby corrected gently. "You deserve honesty, and this is my truth." He looked up at her, eyes glassy. Ruby continued, "I gave Hector my last name. Not to exclude you, but because I needed stability. I needed something solid when everything else felt uncertain." Irwin nodded slowly. "I understand." Ruby softened just slightly. "If you want to be in his life, that's a different conversation, but I need to know you're showing up for him, not to fix your guilt." Irwin nearly lost his breath. "Ruby, please don't think this is guilt. What is it then?" she asked. Irwin hesitated. "It's everything. I think about him every day. Even before tonight, I wondered." Ruby didn't let the silence drag. "Wondering isn't the same as showing up." He nodded. "I know." The tray was still sitting on the counter. Ruby rested her hand lightly against her lower back, shifting her weight as Hector pressed upward. Irwin noticed immediately. "Are you okay? Do you need to sit?" Ruby smirked faintly. "Pregnancy is a full-time workout. I'm fine." He wanted to help her. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to do everything he hadn't done before. But he didn't reach out physically. He didn't earn that right tonight. Instead, he asked carefully, "Will you let me be involved in any way you're comfortable with?" Ruby met his gaze evenly. "I'll let you walk me out." "That's a start." Irwin blinked. "Really?" She nodded. "But tonight isn't the place for everything we need to say. Too many eyes, too much noise. So, we'll talk later?" he asked, hopeful. "Yes," she said. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere neutral, somewhere where you're not Irwin the CEO. And I'm not Ruby the catering staff, but just two people trying to figure out how to raise a child." Irwin's chest tightened. "Thank you." Ruby adjusted her tray. "I need to finish my shift. The team is counting on me." "I can wait," he said quickly. Ruby gave him a small, steady look. "No, you can meet me at the exit in an hour." He nodded immediately. "Okay, I'll be there." She began walking back toward the floor. Irwin watched her go, his breath shaky but full of something he hadn't felt in months. Hope, and fear, and longing, and the weight of becoming someone better. not for her approval, but for their son. As she blended back into the swirl of the ballroom, Erwin rested a hand against the window and whispered, "Hector, I'm coming, I promise." The cafe smelled like warm cinnamon and freshly baked muffins as the early afternoon sun drifted through the large windows. Situated on a quiet street just outside Ruby's neighborhood, it was one of those places that offered soft music and outdoor seating under string lights. It wasn't fancy, just comfortable, a place where real conversations happened. Erwin arrived 30 minutes early. He paced near the entrance, then sat at a small patio table, then stood again. His hands trembled so visibly he shoved them into his pockets. It felt surreal, after months of emptiness, regret, and sleepless nights spent replaying memories he wished he could rewrite. He was finally meeting his son. His son. The words felt too big for his chest. Every few minutes he checked the small gift bag sitting beside him, a plush white duck toy he spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing. He tried to avoid anything too flashy. Nothing over the top, just something gentle, something that would make Ruby feel respected, not overwhelmed. He imagined the moment Ruby would arrive. He imagined himself freezing, fumbling, stumbling. He imagined staring at the baby and forgetting how to speak. He practiced lines in his head. "Ruby, thank you for coming. Hi, Hector. I'm sorry I wasn't there earlier." Each one felt too small for the weight of the moment. As his nerves tightened, he reached for his water glass. It rattled in his hand. Then he heard it, the soft rumble of stroller wheels on pavement. Erwin's breath caught. He turned. There she was. Ruby approached the patio slowly, pushing a stroller with one hand while adjusting her bag across her shoulder. Her curls were tied back loosely, a few strands framing her face. She wasn't dressed up, just a simple top and maternity-friendly jeans, but she looked grounded, strong, clear-eyed, and in the stroller, a tiny boy with round cheeks, soft curls, and eyes too bright for such a small face blinked up at the world, kicking his feet with a little grunt. Erwin froze completely. Ruby gave him a polite nod, not a smile, but not cold either. "You got here early. I didn't want to miss anything," he replied softly. Ruby studied him for a moment, then slid into the chair opposite. She maneuvered the stroller next to her seat, lifting the sunshade just enough so Erwin could really see the baby. Erwin's breath quivered. Hector looked up at him with wide brown eyes. His tiny hand opened and closed, as if he were testing out his fingers for the first time. His curls framed his forehead in soft waves. Erwin felt stunned. He lowered himself slowly into the chair, afraid that if he moved too quickly the moment would shatter. Ruby unbuttoned the blanket around the baby. "Hector, this is Erwin." The baby tilted his head, as if trying to understand why this tall man was staring at him like he held the universe. Erwin swallowed. "Hi, little man," he whispered. His voice cracked. Ruby caught it, and something subtle shifted in her expression, recognition of sincerity. Hector blinked at Erwin. Then, without warning, he let out a soft coo. Erwin's entire face crumpled in awe. He clasped a hand over his mouth, overwhelmed by emotion. "Ruby, he's beautiful," he whispered. Ruby nodded quietly. "He's a good baby. Calm, very observant." Erwin leaned forward slightly. "He looks like you." "He has your forehead," Ruby teased gently. Erwin laughed, unexpected, shaky, real. He wiped at his eyes. "I can't believe I'm meeting him like this." Ruby softened a little. "We're here now. That's what matters." The server approached, leaving menus on the table. Ruby ordered a lemonade. Erwin barely noticed anything outside the stroller. Hector reached up, hand curling toward Erwin again. Ruby watched closely. "You can touch his hand if you want. He likes fingers." Erwin's voice trembled. "Are you sure?" She nodded. He extended one finger slowly, like a man defusing something fragile. Hector's tiny fist wrapped around it instantly. Erwin gasped, not loudly, but enough that Ruby saw how deeply the moment hit him. His whole chest seemed to lift and collapse at once. Ruby sat back, absorbing the sight quietly. She didn't smile big. She simply watched, letting the moment exist. For a long minute, no one spoke. Just Erwin holding his son's hand for the first time. Just Hector studying the face of a man he somehow seemed drawn to. Just Ruby realizing this meeting had weight neither of them could deny. Finally, Ruby cleared her throat softly. "Erwin, I need to ask something." He looked up immediately. "Anything. Please." "Why now?" she asked. Why reach out after all this time, especially after you heard rumors months ago? Erwin hesitated, choosing his words with care. Because I was scared, he admitted. When I heard things about you possibly being pregnant, I didn't know if it was real, or if I had already ruined everything. Ruby listened. I kept hoping you'd reach out again because I didn't know how to face the truth, he continued. It wasn't that I didn't want to know, I just didn't believe I deserved to. Ruby took that in. So instead of asking me directly, you just waited. Yes, he said quietly. And every day I didn't reach out, it got harder. I was ashamed. I didn't think I had the right to intrude in your life after how I left. Ruby's eyes lowered. You hurt me deeply, Erwin. I know, he whispered, voice cracking. And I'm sorry. For walking away. For shutting down. For leaving you alone that day. I replay it every night. Hector squeezed Erwin's finger tighter, unaware his tiny hand was grounding a mountain of regret. Erwin continued, I didn't break things because of you. I broke them because of me. I didn't know how to handle my emotions. I didn't know how to be vulnerable. I thought distance made me strong. Ruby sighed softly. Distance made us strangers. He nodded painfully. Yes, and that's the biggest mistake of my life. Ruby straightened her posture. Erwin, if we do this, co-parenting, rebuilding trust, it has to be slow, and it has to be intentional. I won't let Hector grow up confused. Of course, Erwin said immediately. No disappearing acts, Ruby added. No silence. If you say you're going to show up, you show up. If you need to cancel, you communicate. Not maybe, not later, not I'm busy. Clear communication. Erwin pressed his hand against his chest. I can do that. I will do that. And one more thing, Ruby said firmly. This isn't about buying your way in. Erwin nodded. I know. If you show up for Hector, it must be with your time, your presence, and your patience, not your checkbook. Erwin leaned forward. Ruby, I would give anything to be in his life, but I'm not trying to buy my place. I want to earn it. Ruby studied him for a long moment. And what about us? She finally asked. Erwin froze. Us? Yes, Ruby said, voice steady. We're connected, permanently, but we don't know if that connection will turn into a relationship again, or just a partnership as parents. I need honesty about what you want. Erwin swallowed. Hard. I want to build something real, he said softly. I want to earn your trust again. Not fast, not carelessly. I want to show you that I can be the man you thought I was. Ruby held his gaze. And you understand that I'm not rushing back into romance just because you're here. Absolutely, he said. I don't expect anything romantic until you're ready, if ever. My priority is Hector first and your peace second. Ruby exhaled slowly. Good. Hector let out a high-pitched squeal, kicking both legs. Ruby reached into the stroller and lifted him, resting him carefully against her shoulder. Erwin's heart thudded. Can I hold him? Ruby adjusted Hector gently and looked at Erwin. She assessed him. His posture, his sincerity, his trembling hands. Sit back, she instructed. He obeyed. She positioned Hector and slowly leaned forward. Support his head, she said. Erwin's hands were steady now, not from confidence but from devotion. Ruby placed Hector in his arms. Erwin inhaled sharply, eyes widening. Hector settled quickly, snuggling into his chest with soft whimpers. Erwin looked like a man holding the most fragile, precious object of his life. Hi, he whispered. I'm right here. Ruby watched closely, watching Erwin's fear, awe, gentleness. Hector reached up and bopped Erwin's chin with his tiny fist, producing a baby laugh. Erwin nearly melted. Ruby, he likes me. Ruby's lips curved, small but genuine. He does. Erwin held Hector tighter, tears pooling. Thank you for letting me meet him. You should meet him, Ruby replied. You're his father, Erwin. But being his father means effort, consistency, and showing up when things get messy. Babies aren't just cute moments. Erwin nodded. I'm ready for all of it. Every part. Ruby didn't correct him. She didn't warn him. She simply watched. After a long moment, she cleared her throat. Erwin? Yes, he whispered, still staring at Hector. She paused. If you really want to be in his life, she said slowly, carefully, we'll do this. Erwin held his breath. But we're doing it the right way. He nodded instantly, tears slipping down his face. "I'll follow your lead," he whispered. "Whatever it takes." Ruby's expression softened with hope she didn't try to hide this time. "Good," she said gently. "Then let's start from here." Erwin kissed Hector's tiny forehead. Ruby watched her son in his arms. For the first time since the rainstorm breakup, since the silence, since the heartache, she let herself imagine a future with possibility. A future built not on fear but on intention, on effort, on love, in action. And this time, they would do it right. Erwin didn't sleep the night after the cafe meeting. Not for lack of trying, he tried everything. Silence, white noise, meditation apps, a warm shower, even reading a tech article he normally found interesting. Nothing worked. Every time he closed his eyes, all he could see was Hector's tiny hand resting around his finger. His son's tiny laugh, Ruby's watchful eyes, the weight of the moment he held his child for the first time. The next morning he was up before sunrise, staring at his phone. He kept rehearsing what to text. "Good morning, Ruby. How are you feeling? Do you need anything today? When can I see Hector again? I want to help. Tell me how to be there." All the messages felt heavy, like too much or not enough. At 7:02 a.m., Ruby texted first. "Ruby, Hector has a checkup today at 10. If you want to come, meet us at the clinic." Erwin's heart almost burst. "Erwin, I'll be there." No emojis, no over-explaining, just commitment. Ruby responded with a simple, "Okay." The clinic was a modest building in a quiet part of town. Erwin arrived 20 minutes early and stood outside, trying to look calm. When Ruby rounded the corner with the stroller, he straightened like someone had assigned him a test he wanted an A+ on. "Morning," Ruby said, her tone neutral but not cold. "Good morning," he replied, glancing at the stroller. "Hi, Hector." Hector let out a soft squeal as if greeting him personally. Ruby hid the small tug at her mouth. Inside the clinic, Erwin let Ruby lead. She checked in at the front desk with ease, rocking Hector gently with one hand. Erwin carried the diaper bag without being asked, holding it carefully as if it were a priceless object. Ruby noticed but didn't comment. While they waited, Erwin leaned forward, watching Hector tug at his blanket. "Does he always grab at everything?" Ruby nodded. "Curiosity stage. Everything is fascinating, including people." As if on cue, Hector stretched his hand toward Erwin again. Erwin reached out, letting him hold his finger. The boy squeezed, his tiny fingers confident and warm. Ruby watched quietly. She didn't swoon, didn't soften outright, but she observed. This was the first time she'd seen Erwin show up for something unglamorous. No gala lights, no suits, just a waiting room with stickers on the wall and kids running around in pajamas. A nurse finally called them in. Inside the exam room, Hector lay on the table while the doctor checked his heartbeat and reflexes. Erwin asked thoughtful questions, not intrusive, not panicked, just genuine. "Is his weight okay? Does he need more vitamin D? Is there anything I should bring when I watch him?" Ruby blinked. "When you watch him," she asked slowly, "if you're comfortable with it." Eventually, Erwin clarified, "I want to be hands-on. I don't want to be the father who only shows up for pictures." Ruby didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied how his eyes stayed glued to Hector, not to the doctor, not to her. It wasn't performative. He meant it. After the appointment, Ruby adjusted her bag. "I need to stop by the baby store nearby. Hector's outgrowing half his clothes." Erwin asked cautiously, "Can I come?" Ruby hesitated for half a breath. Not because she didn't want him there, she was simply assessing whether it made sense, whether it was too fast. Then she nodded. "Sure." Erwin's shoulders eased. At the store, Ruby navigated the aisles like a seasoned professional. Erwin, on the other hand, looked like he'd stepped into a foreign universe. Bright colors, rattles, breastfeeding pillows, diaper towers, onesies with funny messages. He picked up a newborn-sized shirt with a cartoon avocado on it. "Is this too small?" Ruby chuckled. "That's for a baby fresh out of the womb. Hector needs bigger sizes." Erwin put it back carefully, as if returning a precious artifact. Ruby guided him toward the appropriate section. "Check the tags. Look for 6 to 9 months." "I'm on it," he said with surprising seriousness. He inspected each outfit like he was analyzing a board acquisition. Hector, in the stroller, babbled happily, kicking his feet each time his father held up a shirt. Ruby found herself watching Erwin more than the clothes. He concentrated with his full face, eyebrows pulled together, lips pressed in determination. He brought her a small blue onesie. What about this? Soft cotton. Ruby checked the size and quality. That's good. The tiny lift of satisfaction on Erwin's face almost made her laugh. Outside, Ruby began to load the stroller into her car. Let me help, Erwin offered. Sure, just fold it down like he tried and failed. The stroller snapped halfway, then jammed. He wrestled with it while Ruby bit back a smile. It's tricky, he muttered. It's not, Ruby teased gently. Erwin glared at the metal frame like it had insulted him personally. I run robotics labs. Why is this defeating me? Ruby leaned closer and pressed one button. The stroller folded smoothly. Erwin froze. One button? One. She nodded. One. Hector chuckled. Erwin looked down and whispered, You're laughing at me, aren't you? Ruby shook her head, losing the battle against her smile. This was one of the small tests, though she never said it aloud. Could he laugh at himself? Could he handle not being perfect? Could he show up for mundane moments without performing? So far, yes. 2 days later, Ruby texted him. Ruby, I have a birth class tonight. You don't have to come, but you can if you want. He replied instantly. Erwin, I want to. Tell me the time. Ruby stared at her phone longer than she expected before she typed the details. The class was in a small community room at a health center. Most expectant parents arrived in pairs. Some held hands. Some joked nervously. One couple practiced breathing exercises before the session even started. Erwin walked in wearing jeans and a simple shirt. Still neat, still polished, but casual in a way that suited the moment. He spotted Ruby, lifted a hand in a gentle wave, and sat beside her. When the instructor asked everyone to introduce themselves, Ruby simply said, Ruby, due in a few weeks. Erwin swallowed and added, I'm Erwin, and I'm learning. Ruby blinked at him. That wasn't a rehearsed line. It wasn't prideful. It wasn't defensive. It was honest. During the diaper demonstration, Erwin tried to follow along. The baby doll slipped from his grip and nearly rolled off the table. He caught it at the last second. Ruby laughed under her breath. Don't drop the real one. I won't, he promised. During the breathing exercises, Erwin inhaled too sharply and coughed. Ruby nudged him. Relax. He tried. He failed again. Ruby found herself enjoying it far more than she expected. After the class, they walked out together. Thank you for coming, she said softly. I want to be present, he replied. Not just physically. In every way. Ruby nodded slowly. I can see that. A warmth spread through him. That week, Ruby sent him a short video one evening. It was Hector on his back, kicking with excitement and squealing as he reached for a toy. Erwin called immediately. He's so alert, Erwin said, eyes lighting up through the phone. He is, Ruby agreed, smiling. Did he just say something? Erwin leaned so close to the screen, his nose almost touched it. Ruby laughed. He's just experimenting with sounds. Erwin listened, his voice soft. I missed so much. Ruby didn't respond right away. I won't miss anything else, he added quietly. This time, she believed him. Erwin's assistant was confused the next morning. You want to move the board meeting? Yes, Erwin said, typing with speed. But the investors, reschedule it. Sir, may I ask why? I have a commitment. The assistant blinked. Of course. Erwin didn't explain further. No one needed to know that the commitment was Ruby's second prenatal appointment that week. No press release, no speech, just showing up. Ruby noticed. Not because he bragged, he didn't tell her at all, but because he walked into the waiting room slightly out of breath, still wearing his employee badge. You okay? She asked, lightly. I ran from the parking structure, he said. Didn't want to be late. She didn't tease him. She simply said, thank you. The real test came at the end of the week. Ruby had minor complications, nothing dangerous, but enough for her. Doctor to schedule a precautionary non-stress test at the hospital. She texted Erwin. Ruby, going to the hospital. Probably fine, but they want to monitor him. Erwin was in the middle of the most important investor meeting of his quarter. Charts on the screen. Analysts waiting for projections. 20 people looking at him. He read Ruby's text and didn't hesitate. Excuse me, he said, closing his laptop. I have to go. Now, an investor asked. Yes. Is everything okay? Another inquired. It will be. But I need to be somewhere important. He didn't offer more details. He didn't apologize for prioritizing his family. He simply left. He drove faster than usual, safe but determined. When he entered the hospital room, Ruby was lying on the bed with monitoring belts around her belly. Hector's heartbeat fluttered rhythmically through the machine. Erwin approached quietly. How are you feeling? Ruby looked at him, a mix of surprise and relief passing through her eyes. You left work? I needed to be here, he said simply. Ruby didn't speak for a moment. Then she whispered, Thank you. He sat beside her, taking her hand, not romantically but supportively. He watched the monitor with the same intensity he used to reserve for billion-dollar contracts. Hector's heartbeat pulsed steadily. Erwin exhaled shakily. He sounds strong. Ruby nodded. He is. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. His presence said everything. And Ruby, for the first time in months, felt something soften deep in her chest. Not forgiveness, not romance, but trust. Fragile, new trust. By the time the nurse cleared her, Ruby sat up slowly, adjusting her gown. Erwin helped her carefully without making a fuss. Do you need a ride home? He asked. No. My mom is coming. He nodded. I'll follow you out, okay? Okay. As they walked toward the exit, Ruby stole a glance at him. He was different now. Not stiff, not defensive, not hiding behind confidence, just present, just trying, just showing up in small, consistent ways that mattered. Ruby whispered under her breath, almost too soft for him to hear, You're really doing it. Erwin turned. Doing what? Learning to be a father. Her voice held no sarcasm, no judgment, only truth. He swallowed. Overcome. I'm trying, Ruby. Every day. I can see that, she said gently. And for the first time, her steps fell in sync with his as they walked out together. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Hector's tiny fists became curious hands. His soft cries grew into babbles that bounced through whichever room Ruby carried him into. And Erwin, slowly, steadily, found his rhythm in this new life. It wasn't perfect. He still fumbled with diaper tabs. He still bought the wrong brand of wipes sometimes. But Ruby noticed something important. He never stopped trying. This part of their journey wasn't loud. It wasn't glamorized. It wasn't rushed. It was built in quiet kitchens, in backyards with folding chairs, and in living rooms with burp cloths draped over shoulders. It was built in family. The first time Erwin cooked dinner for Ruby and Hector, it was a chaotic masterpiece. He burned the garlic. He over-seasoned the chicken. Hector sat in his high chair, staring at the smoke with wide eyes. Ruby fanned the air with a towel. Erwin, what did you do? I followed the video, he insisted while turning off the stove. What video? The one you sent me 2 weeks ago. Ruby laughed from deep in her stomach. Baby, that recipe was for somebody who already knows how to cook. Erwin froze. I did not know that. Clearly. But when they sat at the table with the slightly charred but still edible meal, Ruby noticed something. Erwin cut the chicken into tiny pieces so she wouldn't have to juggle Hector with one hand. He kept checking that Hector's mashed food wasn't too hot. He even remembered to bring extra napkins. Effort, intention, growth, the kind that mattered. One Saturday afternoon, Ruby's family hosted a casual backyard cookout. The kind where kids chased each other through sprinklers, music floated from portable speakers, and the grill smoked from morning until late evening. Erwin arrived carrying a bag of groceries Ruby told him to bring. But when he stepped into the yard, something unexpected happened. Her uncle handed him an apron, a bright yellow apron with "Kiss the Cook" printed in big letters. Erwin blinked. Is this for me? Ruby's uncle nodded. You helping on the grill, man. Don't look scared. Ruby wheezed. Erwin scared? Never. Erwin straightened his shoulders. I'm not scared. 5 minutes later, he was squinting at chicken wings, asking, How do I know when it's cooked? Ruby's cousin shook his head. You rich folks don't grill, huh? Erwin turned slightly defensive. I grill, Ruby whispered from behind him. On what, Erwin? A rooftop gas grill with preset temperature buttons? He paused. Maybe. Her family burst out laughing. But instead of shrinking, Erwin leaned into the moment. He listened carefully as the men explained charcoal placement, and flipping timing. He wiped sweat from his forehead. He turned to the chicken slowly, and when he got one wing perfect, he held up the tongs with triumph. Ruby caught the proud grin on his face. He wasn't trying to impress them with money. He was trying to fit into a world where laughter, love, and community meant more than any suit he had ever worn. Hector gurgled from Ruby's hip, watching his father with big, amused eyes. "Your dad is trying," Ruby whispered into Hector's curly hair, "and he's finally learning how we live around here." There was a time when Erwin's idea of a dinner date meant a multi-course meal at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Now, he found himself enjoying evenings with Ruby, where they sat at her kitchen table, eating pasta and vegetables, while Hector squealed at the spoon he refused to let go. One Wednesday night, Ruby leaned back and looked at Erwin. "You know," she said lightly, "a year ago you would have invited me to a place with a dress code and 14 forks." Erwin laughed softly. "And you showed up wearing sneakers and made the maitre d' nervous." Ruby held her chest, pretending to be offended. "I was comfortable." "I liked it," Erwin admitted. "It made me rethink the fork situation." Ruby smiled. "Well, now look at you, eating pasta in my kitchen with a baby on your lap." Hector swung the spoon again, smacking it lightly against Erwin's cheek. Erwin didn't flinch. "Yes, a very fancy dining experience." Ruby covered her mouth, laughing. These were the moments Ruby paid attention to. Not gifts, not declarations, not promises, moments. Consistency grew in the quiet. At another cookout weeks later, Ruby's aunt pulled Erwin aside. "So," she said with narrowed eyes, "you back for real this time, or just visiting?" Erwin swallowed. "For real. I want to be in Ruby and Hector's life, fully." Ruby's aunt crossed her arms. "We'll see." He nodded respectfully. "I understand." Her aunt blinked. She didn't expect that answer. Ruby watched from across the yard, holding Hector's bottle. She noticed Erwin didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He didn't list accomplishments or offer explanations. He accepted her aunt's hesitation with humility. Later, Ruby approached him. "You okay?" Erwin shrugged faintly. "It's natural. I hurt you. I hurt them too. Time will soften things." Ruby studied him. "You're growing." Erwin didn't smile with ego. He smiled gently. "I'm trying." The holidays brought an invitation to Ruby's extended family party. Erwin went with them, wearing a slightly too big holiday sweater Ruby bought because she said it made him look like a friendly neighbor instead of a stock photo CEO. Walking through the doorway with Ruby on one side and Hector in his arms, Erwin felt something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. People greeted Ruby with cheers and excitement. Kids ran up to Hector, cooing at him. The living room smelled of baked goods and slow-cooked meals. Ruby leaned in and whispered, "This is what real holidays feel like." Erwin nodded, taking in the warmth, the joy, the noise. "This is nothing like what I grew up with." "How were your holidays?" she asked softly. Erwin paused. Quiet, too quiet, more presentational than heartfelt. Ruby touched his arm gently. "Well, welcome to the chaos." Over the course of the evening, Ruby watched Erwin carrying Hector with confidence, letting toddlers pull him into games, holding a plate of food while her uncle piled extra servings on it, smiling at jokes, listening more than he spoke. She realized something. Erwin was no longer trying to fit into her world. He was learning to live in it. Later that night, when Hector fell asleep on Erwin's shoulder, they stepped into the hallway for quiet. Ruby whispered, "He likes sleeping on you. It's his favorite spot." Erwin looked down at his son, eyes warm. "It's mine too." Ruby paused, then said softly, "We've come a long way." "We have," he agreed. "We're not rushing into anything, right?" She clarified gently. "No," he said. "We don't have to. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Ruby nodded. "Good." Erwin hesitated, then added, "But I do want you to know something." Ruby raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" He shifted Hector carefully and looked straight at her. "People used to call you my wife long before I deserved that title. I didn't realize then how much I took for granted." Ruby's breath caught slightly. Erwin continued softly, "If we build a life together again, I want it to be because you choose it, not because I let pride get in the way or because I rush you. I want to earn that place properly." Ruby didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at him with an expression he hadn't earned in a long time, softness mixed with cautious hope. We'll see how you keep showing up, she finally said. Erwin nodded. Fair. Weeks passed. Their CO parenting rhythm became natural. They had inside jokes again, shared glances again, conversations that lasted longer than a few minutes. One night, after putting Hector to bed, Ruby settled onto the couch with a blanket. Erwin sat beside her to go over some paperwork for Hector's daycare registration. Their shoulders brushed. Neither moved away. Remember when you spilled wine on your shirt during our first real date? Ruby teased. Erwin groaned. Don't remind me. You laughed for 10 minutes. You panicked like you'd ruined world peace. It felt like it. She nudged him. You're less tightly wound now. You helped with that, he replied, meeting her eyes. The closeness returned slowly, carefully. Their hands didn't touch, not yet, but the air between them changed. Comfortable, warm, unforced. When Erwin left that night, he paused at the door. Ruby, he said quietly. Yeah? I want our future to be something we both build, with time, patience, and respect. Ruby gazed at him thoughtfully. We're getting there. He nodded, accepting that this was the careful pace their healing needed. One evening after another backyard family night at Ruby's mom's house, Erwin helped carry Hector's things to Ruby's car. When they reached her driveway, the street was quiet. Ruby stood beside him, holding Hector, who slept peacefully against her chest. Erwin looked from Hector to her, eyes warm and grateful. Thank you for letting me in. Thank you for showing up, she replied softly. For a moment, they stood close enough that Ruby felt the warmth of his breath. Their faces hovered near each other, just close enough that a kiss could have happened. But Ruby stepped back gently. Not yet, she whispered. Erwin nodded without hurt. Whenever you're ready. The tenderness of his voice made her heart pull. A few nights later, Erwin came by with a small gift. Not jewelry, not expensive, nothing flashy. It was a framed picture Ruby had casually mentioned wanting, Hector's newborn photo printed in soft color, framed in simple wood. Ruby held it carefully. Erwin, this is beautiful. He shrugged lightly. It felt right. You remembered. I remember everything you say, he replied, eyes honest. Ruby looked up, surprised by the sincerity. He continued, voice gentle. I may not deserve another chance at your heart yet, but Ruby, I want to show you with time. Not speeches, not grand things, just us. She felt emotion well in her chest. Actions, she whispered. Actions, he repeated. On another night, they sat together watching Hector crawl across the floor, giggling as he tried to pull himself up on the couch. Erwin reached over and brushed something off Ruby's shoulder, an invisible speck she wasn't sure even existed. Her breath caught. He noticed. Too soon? He asked quietly. Ruby swallowed. No, just gentle. He nodded. Gentle is good. They leaned, just slightly, toward each other. Not enough for a kiss, but enough for Ruby to feel warmth. Her heart opened one careful inch at a time. As Hector drifted to sleep in her arms, Erwin spoke again. I want to build a life with you both, he said softly, but this time, no pride, no rushing, no pretending, just honesty, real partnership, and whatever pace feels right for you. Ruby didn't speak immediately. She looked down at Hector's sleeping face, then back at Erwin. We're becoming a family again, she said quietly. Erwin exhaled with relief. We are. Then she added, if you want to build something real, keep doing what you're doing. Keep showing up. He nodded. I will. The sun hung warm and low over Ruby's backyard, spilling gold across the grass like a quiet blessing. The day was clear enough to see the tops of palm trees swaying in the distance, and the gentle California breeze carried the scent of grilled vegetables Ruby had cooked earlier. In the center of the yard, Hector, now a toddler with sturdy little legs and a laugh that could lift the entire block, waddled determinedly across the lawn holding a plastic toy hammer he refused to let go of. Every few steps, he stumbled, regained his balance, then continued marching toward Erwin, who crouched near the patio. Come on, champ, Erwin encouraged, arms open wide. You got it. Hector squealed, took a slightly sharper step, and landed right in Erwin's hands. Erwin scooped him up with a deep, joyful laugh that Ruby felt all the way in her chest. You're getting faster, Erwin said, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of Hector's soft curls. Ruby leaned against the doorframe, watching them with a peace she hadn't felt in over a year. The kind of peace that didn't cloud itself with what if, or should have, or maybe. This peace belonged to the present. To now. to healing. Erwin caught her looking and smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded. "You okay over there?" he asked. Ruby stepped into the yard, letting the grass brush against her ankles. "I'm good," she said. "Better than good." Hector wiggled out of Erwin's arms to resume toddling around, humming to himself in baby rhythm. Ruby approached slowly. "He looks so happy today." "He gets it from you," Erwin said softly. Ruby shook her head. "He gets it from us." Erwin blinked, touched by the inclusion. His shoulders softened. They settled into lawn chairs under the shade of a tall eucalyptus tree. Hector plopped down in front of them with a bucket of colorful blocks and began stacking them. Well, attempting to. They toppled with each try, and each time, he clapped like this was part of the plan. Ruby's eyes drifted to Erwin, who watched Hector with an intensity that came from gratitude, not guilt. The change in him wasn't loud. It wasn't forced. It wasn't some grand gesture designed to impress her. It was in the way he leaned forward every time Hector tried something new, memorized Hector's patterns, laughed with him, not at him, made space for Ruby to rest when she needed a moment. This was the kind of consistency she prayed for during her loneliest nights, the kind she convinced herself she might never see. "You've gotten good at this," Ruby said quietly. Erwin raised an eyebrow. "Good at what?" "Being a dad." He didn't exhale sharply or puff up with pride. He didn't act surprised or awkward. He simply sat with her words like they were fragile, precious, and meant to be respected. "I worked for it," he said. "Every day, every hour. I wanted to earn my place." Ruby nodded slowly. "And you did." Erwin rested his elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. "Ruby, can I tell you something?" She turned toward him. "Yeah. Go ahead." He looked out at Hector, who was now very busy trying to stuff a block into his tiny shoe. "When I walked away," Erwin said, "I thought I was protecting myself from the parts of life I didn't know how to handle. I didn't understand what it meant to love someone in a real way, not with gifts or plans or the stuff money can shield you from." Ruby listened in full silence. "I didn't leave because I didn't care," he continued. "I left because I was scared to need you, and I didn't know how to be enough for you." Ruby's eyes softened. "Erwin," he shook his head gently, "I'm not saying this for forgiveness or even sympathy. I'm saying it because, being here now, with you and Hector, I see what I almost lost, and I'm grateful you didn't shut the door forever." Ruby swallowed deeply, emotion rising in her chest. "I didn't keep the door open for you," she said quietly. "I kept it open for Hector, and you walked through anyway. That matters." Erwin let the words settle in his heart. "Thank you," he whispered, "for letting me be his father, for giving me space to grow, for not treating me like the same man I used to be." Ruby nodded. "I see your growth, and I appreciate it." Hector crawled into Ruby's lap, babbling nonsense that only babies and angels understood. Ruby kissed the top of his head and looked at Erwin. "So," she said softly, "what do you think the future looks like for us?" Erwin inhaled deeply. He didn't rush. He didn't rehearse. He just answered honestly. "I think," he said slowly, "that we already started building something again. Not because we are chasing what we used to be, but because we're becoming something we never had the chance to become." Ruby tilted her head, listening closely. "I don't want to rush you into anything," Erwin said. "Not labels, not commitments, not expectations. I want to walk at your pace, whatever that looks like. But I want to be clear." He looked her directly in the eyes. "I want a life with you, a real one. Family, partnership, love, all of it. And not because I'm trying to fix a mistake, but because I finally understand what it means to choose someone." Ruby's breath caught. "On my terms," she said quietly. "On your terms," he confirmed. She nodded slowly. "That feels right." Erwin watched her, waiting, not pushing. Ruby shifted Hector to her other knee and said, "We're not broken anymore. We're growing, and I want to keep growing with you." Erwin's eyes warmed with relief. "I'd like that." Suddenly, Hector tossed his toy hammer into the air and shouted, "Da!" Both adults froze. Ruby gasped. "Did he?" Erwin cupped his hand over his mouth. "Did he just say?" Hector clapped joyfully. "Da! Da!" Erwin's entire face changed. His eyes shined. His breath shook. His hands trembled slightly. Ruby smiled through tears. "He said it. He really said it. Erwin reached for his son with arms that weren't entirely steady. "Come here, buddy." Ruby gently set Hector down, and the toddler waddled straight into his father's arms. Erwin lifted him, hugging him tight, letting the moment sink into the deepest part of him. "I'll never forget this," Erwin whispered into Hector's hair. "Never." Ruby brushed her cheek with the back of her hand, wiping a tear she didn't want to hide. "Me neither," she whispered. As Hector played in the dirt patch near the roses, Ruby and Erwin returned to their seats. The sun continued its golden descent behind the fence, bathing them in soft light. Ruby began, "Erwin, I forgave you quietly for a long time, for my peace, but now—" He turned toward her. "I forgive you out loud, not for who you were, but for who you chose to become." Erwin exhaled, eyes stinging faintly. "Ruby, I needed consistency," she continued. "Not speeches, not perfection, just consistency. And you've shown that." "I'll keep showing it," he promised gently. Ruby nodded. "Good." There was no dramatic pause, no overly emotional swell. Just two people acknowledging their truth with honesty. Ruby spoke first. "So, what does being a family look like for you?" Erwin smiled softly. "Being there, every day, every morning and night, helping with everything, loving without holding back, supporting your dreams, being someone Hector can look up to." "And for us?" Ruby asked. "As partners?" Erwin reached out slowly, giving her the chance to pull away. She didn't. "We choose each other," he said quietly. "Not because we have to, not because it's expected, but because we've grown into people who can love each other the right way." Ruby breathed in deeply. Then her fingers slid into his. "Then let's choose each other," she whispered. Their foreheads touched, not quite a kiss, but something just as intimate. "A promise." The narrator stepped back in gently. Life doesn't always give clean starts. Sometimes people break each other's hearts. Sometimes pride gets in the way. Sometimes timing fails. But when people choose honesty over ego, effort over excuses, and forgiveness over bitterness, healing happens. Ruby and Erwin stood up together to watch Hector toddle toward a row of garden tools. "It's not perfect," the narrator continued. "It doesn't have to be. What matters is choosing love with intention, not impulse." Hector picked up a small hose and tugged it. Ruby called out, "Hector, sweetie, don't pull." Erwin added quickly, "Buddy, wait." The hose slipped free and whipped across the yard. Erwin tripped. Ruby burst into laughter as he tumbled harmlessly onto the grass. Hector squealed with delight, waving the hose like a victory flag. Erwin groaned playfully. I'm okay. Ruby ran over, laughing so hard she had to bend over. "Erwin, you are unbelievable." Erwin lay back, laughing with her. "This is what I signed up for." Ruby dropped beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. Hector climbed onto Erwin's stomach, giggling. A real family. A new beginning. A second chance done right. Narrator, if this story touched your heart, do me a favor. Like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and comment the word family so the algorithm knows you're part of ours. And of course, subscribe to Stories by Mr. Flex for more unforgettable stories just like this one.